The moment I saw those deep scratches on the motel room walls, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake checking in. But by then, it was too late to leave. The night was about to become a waking nightmare. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile. The neon sign of the Pine Rest Motel glowed like a beacon in the darkness, promising a bed and a few hours of sleep before I continued my journey. I should have kept driving. The parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in, just a couple of beat-up trucks and my own sedan. The office was a small, dimly lit room that smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The clerk, an older man with a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face, barely looked up from his outdated TV as he handed me the key to room 13. "Checkout's at 11, he grunted, already turning his attention back to the flickering screen. I should have noticed the way his eyes darted nervously to the door as I left, the slight tremor in his hand as he passed me the key. But I was too tired, too focused on the promise of sleep to pay attention to these warning signs. The walk to my room felt longer than it should have, the silence of the night broken only by the crunch of gravel under my feet and the distant hum of the highway. When I reached door 13, I hesitated for just a moment, my hand hovering over the knob. Something felt off, but I chalked it up to road fatigue and pushed the door open. The room was about what you'd expect from a budget motel: faded wallpaper, a sagging double bed, and a TV that looked old enough to have broadcast the moon landing. But it was the walls that caught my attention. In the dim light filtering through the thin curtains, I could see deep scratches marring the dingy paint. They were everywhere, some short and frantic, others long and deliberate, as if someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out. I dropped my bag, my tiredness forgotten as I moved closer to examine the marks. They weren't just on one wall, but all of them, even extending to the ceiling in places. Some looked old, the edges smooth and worn, while others seemed fresher, the paint around them still curled and flaking. A chill ran down my spine as I ran my fingers over the grooves. What could have made these? And why hadn't they been repaired or painted over? I turned to leave, to demand another room, or better yet, a refund so I could get the hell out of there. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard it. A soft scratching sound, coming from somewhere inside the room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound stopped, then started again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from the bathroom. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I moved towards the bathroom door. The scratching grew more intense, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that raised the hair on the back of my neck. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob. Just as my fingers brushed the cool metal, the noises stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. I don't know how long I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, too scared to open it but too paralyzed with fear to move away. Finally, I managed to take a step back, then another my eyes never leaving the bathroom door. I bumped into the bed and nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning quickly, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, half hidden under the bedskirt, was a journal. Its leather cover was worn and scratched, mimicking the walls around me. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with frantic scribbles and desperate pleas. As I flipped through, certain phrases jumped out at me. "It comes at night. Don't look in the mirror." The scratching never stops. The last entry, written in a shaky hand, simply read, "If you're reading this, it's too late. It knows you're here." A loud bang from the bathroom made me drop the journal. The door shuddered in its frame, as if something on the other side was throwing its weight against it. I ran for the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest, but the handle wouldn't turn. I yanked harder, panic rising in my throat, but it was no use. I was locked in. The banging from the bathroom grew louder, more insistent. I could hear wood splintering, the hinges groaning under the assault. I looked around frantically for another way out. The window, I rushed over, but it was sealed shut, the glass too thick to break easily. As I turned back to the room, my eyes fell on the mirror hanging on the wall. For a split second, I saw something in its reflection. A dark shape, hunched and twisted, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I blinked, and it was gone. The bathroom door exploded outward in a shower of splinters. I caught a glimpse of something emerging, something that should not exist in any sane world, before I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed myself into the corner of the room. I could hear it moving, its breath coming in ragged gasps, the sound of claws scraping against the floor as it came closer. The smell hit me then, a stench of decay and something alien, something wrong. I kept my eyes closed, silently praying to any god that might be listening. The scratching sound was all around me now, on the walls, the floor, getting closer and closer. Then suddenly, it stopped. The room fell silent except for my own ragged breathing. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I opened my eyes. The room was empty. No monster. No broken bathroom door. Even the scratches on the walls were gone, the paint smooth and unblemished as if they had never existed. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion, perhaps. But then I saw the journal, still lying on the floor where I had dropped it. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it. The pages were blank. Every single one. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I somehow got out of the room, out of the motel. I drove through the night, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and I was 2 states away. I've tried to convince myself it was all a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by too many hours on the road. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That soft scratching sound coming from just outside my bedroom door. And I know, deep in my bones, that whatever was in that motel room is still out there, waiting, watching. And sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I see something else looking back. Something with eyes that glow in the darkness. Something that smiles with too many teeth. I don't stay in motels anymore. I don't sleep much at all, to be honest. Because I know now that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that lurk in the shadows of rundown motels and haunt the spaces between reality and nightmare. And I know that one day those scratches will appear on my walls. The journal will reappear, its pages filled once more with desperate warnings, and whatever was in room 13 will finally finish what it started. Until then, I keep driving, always moving, never stopping for too long in one place. Because as long as I'm on the road, as long as I don't let myself rest, I can pretend that night never happened. I can pretend I'm safe. But deep down, I know the truth. You can't escape room 13. Not really. Not ever. The moment I heard the footsteps in the attic, I knew this house-sitting gig was going to be anything but ordinary. My parents had always kept that door locked, but now, in the dead of night, something was moving up there. And I was about to discover why some doors are better left unopened. It was supposed to be a quiet week. My parents had finally taken that European vacation they'd been planning for years, and they'd asked me to keep an eye on the house. At 25, I was well past the age of throwing wild parties when the folks were away, so they trusted me implicitly. Plus, I figured it would be a nice break from my cramped apartment in the city. The first couple of days were uneventful. I worked remotely from Dad's study, enjoyed Mom's well-stocked kitchen, and relished the peace and quiet of suburban life. But on the third night, everything changed. I was up late, binging a new series on Netflix, when I heard it. A soft thud like something heavy being dropped coming from above. At first, I thought it might be the house settling. It was an old place, built in the 60s, and had its fair share of creaks and groans. But then I heard it again, followed by what sounded distinctly like footsteps. My heart started racing. The attic had always been off-limits when I was growing up. Dad kept it locked, claiming it was full of old junk and probably not safe to walk around in. But now, there was definitely something up there, moving around. I muted the TV and listened intently. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the attic to the other. Then, silence. I sat there for what felt like hours, straining my ears for any further sound. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep on the couch. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Probably just the wind. Or maybe a raccoon had somehow gotten into the roof space. But as I made my way upstairs to shower, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The attic door, always locked for as long as I could remember, was slightly ajar. I stood at the bottom of the narrow staircase, staring up at that sliver of darkness. Every instinct told me to close the door, lock it if I could, and forget about it. But curiosity, that damned human trait, got the better of me. Taking a deep breath, I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door fully open. The attic was dimly lit by a single circular window at the far end. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight, giving the whole space an ethereal quality. At first glance, it looked exactly as Dad had always described, just a storage space full of old furniture and boxes. But as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something odd. In the center of the room, the dust on the floor had been disturbed. There were footprints, and they didn't look like they belonged to a raccoon. They were human. My heart pounding, I stepped further into the attic. The footprints led to a stack of boxes in the corner. As I got closer, I realized the top box had been opened recently. The packing tape was freshly torn, the flaps hastily closed. With shaking hands, I opened the box. Inside were photo albums, dozens of them. But these weren't the familiar family photos I'd grown up with. These were older, many in black and white, showing people I didn't recognize. I pulled out one of the albums and opened it. The first photo made me gasp. It showed a young woman, probably in her early 20s, standing in front of this very house. She looked eerily similar to me. Same dark hair, same eyes. But the clothes and the car in the background placed the photo sometime in the 1950s. I flipped through more pages, more photos of this woman and a man I assumed was her husband. They looked happy, smiling at the camera, embracing each other. But as I got further into the album, the photos changed. The woman's smile became forced, her eyes haunted. In the last few photos, she looked terrified, her gaze always darting to something just out of frame. The final photo in the album chilled me to the bone. It showed the woman standing in this very attic, her face a mask of fear, reaching towards the camera as if pleading for help. I dropped the album, my hands shaking. What was I looking at? Who was this woman, and why did she look so much like me? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, I heard a creak behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. There, emerging from behind a stack of old furniture, was a figure. It was hazy at first, like heat shimmer on a hot day, but as I watched in horror, it solidified into the form of a man. He was tall, dressed in clothes from another era, and he was smiling. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was predatory, triumphant. I scrambled backward, knocking over boxes in my haste to get away. The figure advanced, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it got closer, I could see right through it to the wall behind. A ghost. I was looking at a ghost. I turned and ran, practically falling down the attic stairs in my desperation to escape. I slammed the door behind me, not stopping until I was out of the house and in my car. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. When I finally calmed down enough to think rationally, I called my parents. It took some convincing, but I finally got them to tell me the truth. The woman in the photos was my grandmother, my real grandmother. The woman I'd grown up calling Gran was actually my step-grandmother. My real grandmother had disappeared in 1956, shortly after my father was born. The police investigation turned up nothing, and eventually, she was declared dead. My grandfather had remarried a few years later, and they had agreed never to tell my father the truth. They thought they were protecting him, and later me, from a painful family history. But they didn't know the whole story. They couldn't have known about the ghost in the attic, the malevolent spirit that had terrorized my grandmother and now seemed fixated on me. I didn't go back to the house. I couldn't, but I did more research, digging into old newspaper archives and county records. I discovered that before my grandparents bought it, the house had belonged to a man named Joseph Crane. He had died there in 1945, in circumstances that were never fully explained. The pieces started to fall into place. Joseph Crane, for whatever reason, had never left that house. His spirit had remained, growing more powerful and malevolent over time. He had tormented my grandmother, perhaps driven her to run away, or worse. And now, decades later, he had sensed my presence. Another woman of the family line back in his domain. I don't know what to do with this knowledge. I can't tell my parents the whole truth. They'd never believe me. But I know I can never set foot in that house again. And I worry constantly about what might happen when they return from their vacation. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear footsteps in my apartment. Soft, deliberate steps that don't belong to any of my neighbors. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a figure. A tall man in old-fashioned clothes, smiling that terrible smile. I tell myself it's just my imagination, my mind playing tricks on me after the shock of what I discovered. But deep down, I know the truth. Joseph Crane isn't confined to that attic. He's latched onto me now, followed me to my new life in the city, and I don't know how to escape him. So I leave the lights on at night. I avoid mirrors and dark corners, and I pray that one day I'll find a way to lay this family ghost to rest, before he does to me whatever he did to my grandmother all those years ago. Because now I know, some doors are meant to stay locked, some secrets are better left buried, and sometimes the past doesn't just haunt us figuratively. Sometimes it comes back with a vengeance, wearing a cruel smile and leaving footprints in the dust of a long-forgotten attic. The moment I realized the car behind me had no headlights, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary drive home. But by then, it was too late. The game of cat and mouse had already begun, and I was the mouse. It was a Friday night, and I was driving back from a late meeting in the city. The rain had started about an hour into my journey, a light drizzle at first that quickly became a torrential downpour. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of wet asphalt disappearing into the darkness. I'd always enjoyed night driving. There was something peaceful about it. The world shrunk down to just me, my car, and the road ahead. But tonight, that peace was shattered by an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I first noticed the car about 20 minutes into my drive. It was a dark sedan, maybe black or dark blue. It was hard to tell in the rain. What caught my attention was that it had no headlights on. In this weather, that seemed not just dangerous, but impossible. How could they see where they were going? At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they'd forgotten to turn them on, or perhaps there was an electrical problem. I expected them to realize their mistake and either turn on their lights or pull over. But they didn't. The car kept pace with me, always staying a few car lengths behind, close enough that I could make out its shape in my rear-view mirror, but far enough that I couldn't see the driver. I increased my speed a little, hoping they'd fall behind. They matched me, perfectly maintaining the distance between us. I slowed down, and they slowed too. That's when the uneasiness turned to fear. This wasn't normal behavior. No one drives like this, especially not in a rainstorm at night. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just using me as a guide, following my taillights since their headlights were out. But if that was the case, why not get closer? Why maintain this eerily precise distance? I fumbled for my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who? The police. What would I tell them? That I was being followed by a car with no headlights. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. As I debated what to do, I approached a fork in the highway. My exit was coming up, a less traveled road that led to my small hometown. At the last second, I made a decision. Instead of taking my usual exit, I stayed on the main highway. The car behind me smoothly followed my change of direction. My heart started racing. This wasn't a coincidence. They were definitely following me. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my speed well above the limit. The car behind me kept pace effortlessly. No matter how fast I went, they maintained that same precise distance. Rain lashed against my windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The lines on the road blurred, making it hard to see where I was going. But I didn't dare slow down. I passed a few other cars, their headlights momentarily illuminating my rearview mirror. Each time, I hoped to see the mysterious car behind me, to confirm that I wasn't going crazy. But in the bright glare, all I could see was darkness where the car should be. As soon as the other cars passed, though, there it was again, still maintaining its distance, still with no headlights. I was nearing another exit when a crazy idea struck me. I waited until the last possible second, then swerved across 2 lanes of traffic and took the exit ramp. My tires screeched in protest, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I might lose control. But I made it. As I flew down the exit ramp, I glanced in my mirror, certain that I'd finally lost them. My blood ran cold. The car was still there. How was this possible? There's no way they could have anticipated my move and reacted in time, unless they knew what I was going to do before I did it. The exit led to a winding country road. In daylight, it would have been scenic. At night, in this storm, it was a nightmare. Tall trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The road twisted and turned, each bend hiding what lay ahead. I drove as fast as I dared, taking the curves at speeds that sent my heart into my throat. But no matter how fast I went, no matter how recklessly I took the turns, the car behind me kept up. My fuel gauge caught my eye, the needle hovering just above empty. In my panic, I'd forgotten about gas. I had maybe 20 miles left, 30 if I was lucky, and I had no idea where the nearest gas station was. As if sensing my predicament, the car behind me suddenly sped up. For the first time, it was closing the distance between us. I pushed my car harder, knowing I was running on fumes. The engine whined in protest as I urged it up a steep hill. As I crested the top, I saw something that made my heart leap. Headlights, approaching from the opposite direction. Relief flooded through me. Another car meant another witness, someone who could confirm that I wasn't crazy, that this mysterious vehicle really was following me. I flashed my lights frantically, trying to get the oncoming car's attention. It was getting closer, close enough that I could see it was a pickup truck. Just as the truck was about to pass me, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The car behind me was gone. I slammed on my brakes, my car skidding on the wet road. The truck blared its horn as it swerved around me, but I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at my mirror in disbelief. The road behind me was empty, no headlights, no dark shape lurking in the shadows. Nothing. I sat there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, rain drumming on the roof. Had I imagined it all? Was it possible that the stress and the late hour had caused me to hallucinate? A tap on my window made me jump. It was the truck driver, looking concerned. I rolled down my window. "You okay?" he asked, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "Saw you flash your lights. Car trouble?" I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it. How could I possibly describe what had just happened? I thought I saw something on the road. I lied. An animal, maybe. Sorry for scaring you. He nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Well, be careful out here. This road can be treacherous in weather like this. Nearest town's about 10 miles ahead if you need help. I thanked him, and he returned to his truck. As he drove away, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe it had all been in my head. The rain, the late hour, the winding road. It was the perfect recipe for an overactive imagination. I was about to start driving again when something caught my eye. There, on the passenger seat, was a piece of paper. I was certain it hadn't been there before. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a note, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. The message sent a chill down my spine. Thanks for the chase. See you again soon. I looked up, my eyes darting to every shadow, every dark space around me. But there was nothing, just the rain, the trees, and the empty road stretching out before me. I crumpled the note in my fist and threw it out the window. Then I started my car and drove, pushing the speed limit the whole way home. I didn't stop until I was safely in my garage. The door closed firmly behind me. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't driven at night since then. I've varied my routes to and from work, always staying on busy roads, always in broad daylight. I've checked my car for tracking devices, changed the locks on my house, even considered moving to a new town. But deep down, I know it won't matter, because whoever, or whatever, was in that car that night, they weren't following my vehicle, they were following me. And I have a terrible feeling that our game of cat and mouse isn't over. It's just on pause. So now, every night, I sit by my window, watching the street outside, and I wait. I wait for the moment when a dark car with no headlights will turn onto my street, because I know it's coming. It's only a matter of time. And when it does, I'll be ready, because this time, I won't be the mouse. This time, I'll be the cat. The first time I saw him lurking outside my building, I thought it was just a coincidence. By the third time, I knew I was being watched. What I didn't know was how quickly my life would spiral into a nightmare of paranoia and fear. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished a grueling shift at the hospital where I work as a nurse. All I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and lose myself in a mindless reality show. As I approached my apartment building, I noticed a man standing across the street. He was average height, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Something about the way he stood, perfectly still, his gaze fixed on my building, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I quickened my pace, fumbling with my keys as I reached the entrance. As I glanced back, the man was gone. I brushed it off as paranoia brought on by exhaustion and too many true crime podcasts. The next day, I saw him again. Same spot, same stance, same unsettling stillness. This time, as I hurried inside, I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my back. I nearly dropped my keys twice before managing to get the door open. By Friday, I was a nervous wreck. He was there every day, always in the same spot, always watching. I had started varying my routes home, even leaving work at different times, but it didn't matter. He was always there, waiting. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a man was standing on a public street, that I had a feeling he was watching me. I had no proof, no evidence of any actual crime, just a gnawing fear that grew stronger with each passing day. On Saturday, things escalated. I had spent the day holed up in my apartment, too afraid to go out. As evening fell, I peered out my window, half expecting to see him in his usual spot. The street was empty, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe it was over. Maybe he had moved on. That's when I heard it. A soft knock at my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I lived alone, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The peephole showed an empty hallway. I waited, barely breathing, straining my ears for any sound. Another knock, louder this time. I jumped back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. Whoever was out there, they were standing to the side of the door, out of view of the peephole. "Who's there?" I called out, hating how my voice trembled. Silence. Then, package delivery. The voice was muffled, but distinctly male. My mind raced. I hadn't ordered anything, and it was well past normal delivery hours. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that I shouldn't open the door. "Just leave it there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll get it later." "Need a signature?" the voice replied. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. As I raised the phone to my ear, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable click of a key in the lock. My lock. I dropped the phone and ran for the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me and wedging a chair under the handle. I could hear the front door opening. Slow, deliberate footsteps entering my apartment. "Here, Kitty, Kitty," a voice called out, sickeningly playful. Time to stop running. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on the lamp on my bedside table. I unplugged it, gripping it tightly in both hands. The footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the bedroom door. The handle jiggled. "Come on out," the voice said. "We both know how this ends." I stood there, frozen in terror, the lamp raised and ready. The door shuddered as he threw his weight against it, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th try, I heard the chair scraping across the floor. One more hit, and the door would give way. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to die here, cowering in fear. As the door burst open, I swung the lamp with all my might. It connected with a satisfying crack, catching my attacker off guard. He stumbled backward, giving me the opening I needed. I bolted past him, not daring to look back as I ran for the front door. I made it to the hallway, screaming for help as I ran towards the stairs. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, his footsteps pounding after me. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my bare feet slipping on the cold concrete. I burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, relief flooding through me as I saw my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, checking his mail. His eyes widened as he took in my disheveled appearance and panicked expression. "Call the police," I gasped, just as my attacker emerged from the stairwell. What happened next was a blur. Mr. Johnson, a retired Marine, moved with surprising speed for a man in his 60s. He tackled my attacker, pinning him to the ground as I fumbled with my phone, finally managing to dial 911. The police arrived within minutes, along with an ambulance. As they led my attacker away in handcuffs, I got my first clear look at his face. It was him, the man who had been watching me all week. But now, in the harsh fluorescent light of the lobby, he didn't look menacing at all. He looked ordinary, just a man, not the monster I had built up in my mind. The detectives told me later that he was wanted in connection with several stalking cases and home invasions across the city. They found detailed notes about my routines in his apartment, along with trophies from other victims. I was lucky, they said. If Mr. Johnson hadn't been there, I didn't go back to my apartment that night, or for many nights after. I stayed with a friend, jumped at every sound, saw danger in every shadow. It took months of therapy before I could sleep through the night without nightmares. Eventually, I moved to a new city, started a new job. I installed a state-of-the-art security system in my new apartment and took self-defense classes. Slowly, I started to feel safe again. But sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of someone standing still on a street corner, or hear footsteps behind me that seem to match my pace. In those moments, The fear comes rushing back, as fresh and raw as it was that night in my old apartment. I know now that the world can be a dangerous place, that there are predators out there who see people like me as prey. But I also know that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. I survived. I fought back. And if, God forbid, I ever find myself in a situation like that again, I'll be ready. Because the thing about being stalked, about living through that kind of terror, is that it changes you. You can let it break you, let the fear control your life. Or you can use it, let it fuel you, make you more aware, more prepared. I chose the latter. I refuse to be a victim again. I refuse to let one man's sick obsession define the rest of my life. Yes, I still look over my shoulder. Yes, I still check the locks twice before I go to bed. But I also live. I laugh. I love. I don't let the fear win. And to the man who thought he could make me his prey, you failed. You may have taken my sense of security for a while, but you didn't take my life, my spirit, or my strength. In trying to break me, you only made me more resilient. So watch all you want. I'm not afraid anymore. Because now, I'm the one you should be scared of. The moment I saw his hand reach into his jacket, I knew this late-night bus ride was about to turn into a fight for survival. But what I didn't realize was that the real danger wasn't just the man with the knife. It was the darkness lurking inside me. I'd boarded the Greyhound in Chicago, bound for a small town in Indiana where my grandmother lived. It was a last-minute decision, prompted by a late-night call from the nursing home. "She's asking for you," they'd said. "You might want to come soon." I knew what that meant. So I'd thrown some clothes in a bag, bought a ticket, and found myself on the 11 p.m. bus, surrounded by a motley crew of night travelers. The bus was about half full when we left the station, a mix of people you'd expect to see on a late-night route, a few college kids with headphones on, probably heading home for the weekend, a couple of worn-looking women I pegged as nurses or waitresses finishing late shifts, and scattered through the back, a handful of rough-looking men who kept to themselves. I settled into a seat near the middle, my backpack tucked safely under my feet. As we pulled out of the station, I leaned my head against the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. The gentle rumble of the engine and the swaying of the bus soon lulled me into a light doze. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I felt it, that prickle on the back of your neck when you know you're being watched. I opened my eyes slowly, trying not to make it obvious I was awake. Through the reflection in the window, I could see a man had moved to the seat directly behind me. He was leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the back of my head. My heart rate picked up, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just looking out the window. Maybe I was being paranoid. I shifted in my seat, making a show of stretching and yawning like I'd just woken up naturally. As I did, I got my first clear look at him. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a scruffy beard and eyes that seemed to gleam with an unsettling intensity in the dim bus lighting. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, his mouth curved into a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Finally awake, sleeping beauty," he said, his voice low and rough. I mumbled something non-committal and turned back around, my mind racing. The bus was quieter now, most of the other passengers asleep or engrossed in their phones. We were on a stretch of dark highway, nothing but fields and forests on either side. I felt him lean closer, his breath hot on my ear. "You got any cash on you, sweetheart? Or maybe a nice phone I could borrow?" My blood ran cold. This was really happening. I was about to be robbed on a Greyhound bus in the middle of nowhere. I don't have much," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a few dollars for food." He chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. Now, don't lie to me. I've been watching you. Nice bag, nice clothes. I bet you've got all sorts of goodies in there." I turned to face him, hoping to reason with him, to appeal to whatever humanity he might have left. That's when I saw his hand disappear into his jacket. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the gleam of metal as he pulled out a knife, small but wickedly sharp. I saw the way his eyes darted around the bus, checking if anyone was watching. And I saw the moment he decided he was going to use that knife, whether I cooperated or not. In that instant, something inside me shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. A cold, clear determination. A voice in my head that said, "Not today, not me." As his hand came up with the knife, I moved. All those self-defense classes my mom had insisted I take suddenly kicked in. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisting it hard while driving my elbow back into his face. I felt something crunch, his nose, probably, and he let out a muffled yell of pain and surprise. The knife clattered to the floor as I launched myself over the seat, landing on top of him. We grappled in the narrow space, his size and strength against my desperation and adrenaline. I could hear shouts from the other passengers now, people waking up to the commotion. He managed to get a hand around my throat, squeezing hard. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as I gasped for air. With my free hand, I scrabbled on the floor, searching for the knife. My fingers closed around the handle just as I felt consciousness starting to slip away. I didn't think. I just acted. The knife went in just below his ribs, sliding in with a sickening ease. His eyes widened in shock, his grip on my throat loosening. I pushed him off me, scrambling back into the aisle. The bus erupted into chaos. People were screaming. The driver was yelling something about pulling over. But all I could focus on was the man slumped in the seat, blood seeping through his shirt where the knife still protruded. I stood there shaking as the bus ground to a halt on the shoulder of the highway. The driver was on his radio, calling for police and an ambulance. A woman who said she was a nurse pushed past me, kneeling beside my attacker to check his pulse. "He's alive," she announced, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I hadn't killed him. I wasn't a murderer. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars and an ambulance arrived, their lights painting the inside of the bus in alternating red and blue. I gave my statement over and over, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. They took the knife as evidence, photographed the bruises forming on my neck, asked me 100 questions about what had happened. By the time they were done, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. An officer told me I was free to go, that it was a clear case of self-defense. They offered to call someone for me, but I shook my head. I just wanted to get to my grandmother. As I waited for another bus to come pick up the stranded passengers, I found myself thinking about the man. Not the one who had attacked me, but the one I had become in those few terrifying moments. The one who had been capable of driving a knife into another human being without hesitation. I'd always thought of myself as gentle, non-violent, but now I knew the truth. Given the right circumstances, pushed far enough, I was capable of anything. It was a chilling realization, but also, in a strange way, empowering. The replacement bus arrived just as the sun was cresting the horizon. As I boarded, my backpack clutched tightly to my chest. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked different somehow. Older, harder. The eyes that stared back at me weren't those of a victim, but of a survivor. I found a seat near the front this time, away from the other passengers. As the bus pulled away, continuing its journey as if nothing had happened, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was alive, I was safe, and I was stronger than I ever knew. But as the bus rolled on towards my destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The world felt different now, more dangerous but also more conquerable. And I knew that I would never be the same person who had boarded that first bus in Chicago. That person had died somewhere on that dark stretch of highway, replaced by someone new. Someone who knew the taste of violence and the weight of survival. Someone who would never be caught off guard again. As we passed a sign welcoming us to Indiana, I made a silent promise to myself. I would visit my grandmother, say my goodbyes, and then I would figure out who this new person was. This person who could stare death in the face and come out the other side. Because one thing was certain, I couldn't go back to my old life. Not now, not ever. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face whatever it might bring. After all, I had faced the worst the night could offer, and I had won. Whatever came next, I would be ready. Be ready. The moment I saw the fresh footprints in the dust of the abandoned attraction, I knew we weren't alone. What had started as a thrilling urban exploration was about to become a nightmare none of us would ever forget. It was Sarah's idea to check out the old Paradise Park. She'd always been the adventurous one in our group, always pushing us to try new things, to step out of our comfort zones. When she showed us the pictures of the decaying amusement park just outside of town, overgrown and forgotten, how could we resist? There were 4 of us. Sarah, the daredevil, Mike, her boyfriend, always eager to impress her, Jess, my best friend since kindergarten, and me, Alex, the cautious one who somehow always got roped into these escapades. We arrived at Paradise Park just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rusted gates and faded signs. The place had been closed for over a decade, left to rot after a series of accidents and financial troubles. Now it stood as a ghostly reminder of happier times, its once cheerful attractions turned eerie in the fading light. "This is awesome," Sarah whispered as we slipped through a gap in the fence. Her eyes were shining with excitement, and I couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation myself. We made our way down what used to be the main thoroughfare, our flashlights illuminating peeling paint and broken windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under our feet and the occasional creak of metal in the wind. "Let's check out the funhouse," Mike suggested, pointing to a dilapidated building with a faded clown face painted on the front. The clown's smile seemed more like a grimace now, its eyes dark and hollow. As we approached, I noticed something odd. The door, which should have been locked or at least difficult to open after years of disuse, swung open easily at Sarah's touch. Inside, our flashlights revealed a maze of mirrors, some cracked, others surprisingly intact. "Look at this," Jess called out, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. She was pointing at the floor, where a clear set of footprints led through the dust. "Probably just some other explorers," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We followed the footprints deeper into the funhouse, past warped mirrors that made our reflections stretch and contort in unsettling ways. The further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The footprints were fresh, the dust still unsettled around them. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. In one of the mirrors, just for a second, I saw a figure that wasn't one of us. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long, spindly limbs and a face hidden in shadow. By the time I turned around, it was gone. "Did you see that?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, we heard it. A laugh, high-pitched and unnatural, echoing through the funhouse. It didn't sound human. Panic set in. We turned to run, but in the maze of mirrors, it was hard to tell which way led out. Every turn seemed to bring us to another dead end, our own terrified reflections staring back at us. The laughter got closer, interspersed now with the sound of footsteps. Not the shuffle of someone walking, but the quick, erratic patter of something scurrying on too many legs. "There!" Mike shouted, pointing to a sliver of moonlight. We'd found the exit. We burst out of the funhouse, gasping for air, but our relief was short-lived. As our eyes adjusted to the darkness, we realized the entire park had changed. The rides, which had been still and lifeless when we entered, were now moving. The rusty Ferris wheel creaked as it turned, empty seats swinging in the breeze. The merry-go-round spun, its painted horses frozen in an eternal gallop. And there were sounds, calliope music, tinny and off-key, and the distant shouts and laughter of a crowd that wasn't there. "We need to get out of here," Jess said, her voice shaking. None of us argued. We ran towards the entrance, but it seemed to get no closer. The paths twisted and turned in ways they hadn't before, leading us deeper into the park instead of out. As we passed the carousel, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The horses weren't empty. Shadowy figures sat astride them, their features indistinct, but their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. One of them turned to look at me, its mouth opening in a silent scream. I ran faster. We found ourselves in front of the old roller coaster, its wooden structure looming above us like the skeleton of some great beast. The cars were moving along the track, the clack, clack, clack of their ascent echoing in the night. In here, Sarah said, pointing to a maintenance door at the base of the coaster. It was our only option. Behind us, we could hear the scurrying footsteps getting closer. The door opened into a dark tunnel that seemed to lead under the coaster. We plunged in, our flashlights barely penetrating the gloom. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. We hadn't gone far when we heard the door slam shut behind us. The sound of a lock clicking into place echoed in the confined space. No, 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 Mike muttered, running back to the door, but it wouldn't budge. That's when we heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that seemed to bypass our ears and speak directly into our minds. "Welcome, players," it said, its tone jovial but with an undercurrent of malice. "You've entered Paradise Park after hours. That's against the rules. But don't worry, we love rule breakers here. They make the game so much more interesting." A light flickered on ahead of us, illuminating a path forward. We had no choice but to follow it. The tunnel opened into a large chamber that must have been under the center of the park. Old ride parts and broken animatronics littered the floor, and in the center, a figure waited. It was the thing I'd seen in the mirror, tall and thin, dressed in a tattered ringmaster's costume. Its face was a blank white mask, featureless except for 2 black holes where eyes should be. "Let's play a game," it said, its voice now coming from the mask but still echoing in our heads. "A simple one. Find your way out of the park before sunrising, and you can leave. Fail, and, well," it gestured to the broken figures around us, "you'll become part of the attractions. Forever." With a laugh that sent chills down my spine, the figure vanished, leaving us alone in the cavernous space. We spent what felt like hours searching for a way out, navigating through dark tunnels and emerging into different parts of the park. Each area held new horrors: clowns with 2 wide smiles and sharp teeth, stuffed animals that moved when we weren't looking, shadows that reached out with clawed hands. We lost Mike in the Hall of Mirrors. His screams suddenly cut short as he rounded a corner. Jess disappeared in the haunted house, pulled into the darkness by something we couldn't see. In the end, it was just Sarah and me, running hand in hand through the nightmare the park had become. We could see the exit, the gates glinting in the pre-dawn light. We were going to make it. Then Sarah stumbled. As I turned to help her up, I saw them, dark shapes moving fast, converging on us from all sides. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and resignation. "Go," she said, pushing me away. "One of us has to make it." I hesitated for a split second, torn between saving myself and staying with her. That moment of indecision sealed my fate. I felt cold hands grab me, pulling me back into the park. The last thing I saw was the sun peeking over the horizon, its rays touching the gates just as they slammed shut. Now, I'm part of Paradise Park, another attraction, another soul trapped in this limbo of endless nights and terrifying games. Sometimes, I see new groups of explorers entering the park, drawn by the same curiosity that doomed us. I want to warn them, to tell them to run, but all I can do is watch, my painted smile frozen in place and as the game begins again. So if you're ever driving by an abandoned amusement park and feel the urge to explore, remember this. Some attractions are best left forgotten, because in places like Paradise Park, the fun never ends. and neither does the terror. The moment I overheard them talking about and covering up the mess, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift at the diner, but I had no idea just how deep into danger I was about to fall. It was a Tuesday night, or rather, Wednesday morning. The kind of hour where the only people out are those who have to be and those who probably shouldn't be. I'd been working the graveyard shift at Mel's 24-hour diner for about 6 months, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunks stumbling in for greasy food to soak up the alcohol. Truckers stopping for coffee strong enough to strip paint. The occasional group of teenagers, high on freedom and lack of sleep. But the two men who walked in at 2:37 a.m. were different. I noticed it right away. They were too alert, too focused for that time of night. One was tall and lean, with close-cropped hair and eyes that never stopped moving. The other was shorter, stockier, with hands that looked like they could bend steel. They sat in a booth near the back, as far from the windows as possible. I grabbed my notepad and approached their table. "Welcome to Mel's. What can I get for you, gentlemen?" The tall one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just coffee for now, sweetheart. Black." I nodded and turned to get their order, trying to ignore the way the stocky one was staring at me. Something about them set my teeth on edge. As I poured their coffee, I could hear them talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out most of it, but a few phrases jumped out at me. "Need to get rid of it tonight. Boss won't be happy if we screw this up. Dump it in the river, no one will find." I nearly dropped the coffee pot. Were they talking about what I thought they were talking about? I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and brought their coffee over. As I set the mugs down, the tall one stopped mid-sentence. They both looked up at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Did they know I'd overheard them? "Anything else I can get you?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The stocky one grunted and shook his head. The tall one kept staring at me for a moment longer before saying, "We're good for now." I nodded and walked back to the counter, my heart pounding. What should I do? Call the police? But what would I tell them? That I overheard a suspicious conversation? They'd laugh me off the phone. I busied myself with wiping down the already clean counter, trying to look like I wasn't paying attention to them. But every nerve in my body was on high alert. They stayed for almost an hour, talking in those same low tones. Occasionally, one would glance over at me, and I'd pretend to be engrossed in restocking sugar packets or checking the coffee maker. Finally, they stood to leave. The tall one tossed some bills on the table and they headed for the door. As they passed the counter, he paused and turned to me. "You have a good night now," he said, his voice friendly, but his eyes cold. "And remember, a smart waitress knows when to forget what she's heard." My blood ran cold. They knew. They knew I'd overheard them. I watched as they got into a nondescript black sedan parked just outside. As they drove away, I jotted down the license plate number on my order pad. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely write. For the rest of my shift, I jumped at every sound. Every customer that came in, I half expected it to be them, coming back to make sure I kept quiet. By the time my relief showed up at 6 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. I debated going straight to the police station, but fear held me back. What if they were watching me? What if they had connections in the police department? In a small town like ours, it wasn't unheard of. Instead, I went home and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices talking about getting rid of it. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my friend Lisa, who worked at the local news station. "Turn on the TV," she said, her voice excited. "Channel 5. You're not going to believe this." I fumbled for the remote and flipped to the news. The headline made my heart stop. Local business mogul found dead in river. The newscaster was talking about how Gerald Hawkins, owner of half the businesses in town, had been found floating in the river early that morning. The police were treating it as a suspicious death. As they showed a picture of Hawkins, I recognized him immediately. He was the boss the men at the diner had mentioned. My mind was racing. I had overheard a murder being planned and covered up, and the killers knew that I knew. I called in sick to work and spent the day pacing my small apartment, jumping at every sound. Should I go to the police? But what proof did I have? Just my word against theirs. And for all I knew, they could have the cops in their pocket. As night fell, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I had to find out more. I drove to the diner, parking a block away and walking the rest of the distance. The place was busier than usual, people gathering to gossip about the big news. I slipped in through the back, nodding to the cook as if I was there for my shift. I made my way to the office, my heart pounding. If there was any evidence of what had happened, it would be in Mel's safe. He kept recordings from the security cameras in there. The office was empty, thankfully. I knew the combination to the safe. Mel wasn't exactly security conscious. Inside, I found stacks of cash, some paperwork, and a box of USB drives labeled with dates. I grabbed the one from last night and was about to leave when I heard voices approaching. Panicking, I ducked into the supply closet, pulling the door shut just as someone entered the office. Through the slats in the door, I could see Mel and the tall man from last night. My blood ran cold. "I appreciate your cooperation, Mel," the tall man was saying. "It's always good to have friends in low places." Mel chuckled nervously. "Happy to help. But, about that waitress. Don't worry about her," the tall man said, his voice chilling. "We'll take care of it." They left the office, and I waited a few more minutes before slipping out. My mind was reeling. Mel was involved somehow, and they were coming for me. I ran to my car, the USB drive clutched tightly in my hand. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I was being followed. Back in my apartment, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The video quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough. I watched as the two men entered the diner, sat down, had their conversation, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. After they left, Mel came out of the back office. He walked to their table, picked up something they had left behind, a small, bloody knife, and took it back to the office. Mel was involved. He was helping them cover up a murder. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. What should I do now? I had evidence, but going to the police still felt risky. And now I knew that Mel, someone I had trusted, was involved. A knock at my door made me jump. "Sarah? It's Mel. Can we talk?" My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. How had he found me? What did he want? I looked around frantically for a way out, but there was only the door and the window, and I was 3 stories up. "Sarah, I know you were at the diner tonight. We need to talk about what you saw." His voice was friendly, but I could hear an edge to it. He knew I knew. I grabbed my phone and the USB drive, looking around for anything I could use as a weapon. The knocking became more insistent. "Sarah, open the door. We can work this out." I made a split-second decision. I couldn't stay here. I opened the window as quietly as I could and looked down. There was a dumpster below, filled with trash bags. It was risky, but it was my only option. Just as I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Mel must have a master key for all his employees' departments. I took a deep breath and jumped. I landed hard, the trash bags cushioning my fall, but not enough to prevent a jolt of pain shooting up my leg. I scrambled out of the dumpster just as I heard Mel's voice from above. "She's running. Get her." I ran like I'd never run before, ignoring the pain in my leg, clutching the USB drive like it was a lifeline. Because in a way, it was. It was the only proof I had of what I'd seen and heard. As I ran through the dark streets, my mind was racing. Where could I go? Who could I trust? One thing was clear. My life as I knew it was over. I was in deep, deeper than I'd ever imagined possible. And all because I'd picked up an extra shift at a 24-hour diner. The moment the power went out and the first call came through, I knew this stormy night was about to become a waking nightmare. What I didn't realize was that the terror was coming from inside our own home. It had been raining for days, the kind of relentless downpour that makes you wonder if it'll ever stop. My husband, Mark, and our 2 kids, Lily and Jack, were all huddled in the living room. We'd been playing board games by candlelight, trying to make the best of the power outage that had plunged our neighborhood into darkness an hour earlier. "Mom, I'm scared," Lily whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter as another crack of thunder shook the windows. I pulled her close, running my fingers through her hair. "It's okay, sweetie. It's just a storm. We're safe in here." If only I'd known how wrong I was. The first call came at 9:47 p.m. Our landline rarely rang these days, but we kept it for emergencies. When it trilled in the darkness, we all jumped. Mark answered, his face illuminated by the flickering candlelight. "Hello?" I watched as his expression changed from confusion to concern. "There's no one here by that name," he said, then paused, listening. "No, I think you have the wrong number." He hung up, shaking his head. Weird. Some guy asking for someone named Sarah. Sounded pretty upset. I shrugged it off. Wrong numbers happen, especially during storms when cell service gets spotty. We went back to our game, but the comfortable atmosphere had shifted. The darkness outside our windows seemed deeper, more menacing. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I answered. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice, low and urgent. "I can see you." A chill ran down my spine. "Excuse me?" In the living room, blue sweater. "You should really close your curtains." I whirled around, staring at the windows. Our curtains were open, the glass black mirrors reflecting our candle-lit faces back at us. For a second, I thought I saw movement outside, but it was gone so fast I couldn't be sure. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Stop calling here or I'm calling the police." A chuckle, then the line went dead. Mark was on his feet now, moving to close the curtains. "What was that about?" I told him, watching as his face paled. He checked all the doors and windows while I held the kids close, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's just some sick prank," Mark said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Let's try to get some sleep. I'm sure the power will be back on by morning." We settled the kids in their room, leaving a candle burning in the hallway. As we climbed into our own bed, another flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Lily's scream pierced the night. I rushed to her room, finding her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "There's someone at the window," she sobbed. My blood ran cold. I looked at the window, but saw nothing but darkness and rain. "Honey, it was probably just a branch hitting the glass. The wind is really strong." But as I tucked her back in, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back in our room, I found Mark on the phone again. His face was ashen. "What now?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "Another call," he said. "A woman this time." She said. He swallowed hard. She said the children are lovely when they sleep. My legs gave out and I sank onto the bed. This couldn't be happening. Who were these people? What did they want? The next hour was a blur of fear and confusion. We called the police, but with the storm, they said it would be at least an hour before anyone could reach us. We gathered the kids in our room, creating a nest of blankets on the floor. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind became a potential threat. The phone kept ringing. Sometimes it was heavy breathing, sometimes whispered threats. Each call revealed something about our movements, proving that whoever it was could see us. The boys' Pokemon pajamas are cute. Your husband looks worried. He should be. That candle won't keep the darkness away for long. We unplugged the landline, but then the calls started coming to our cell phones. Numbers we didn't recognize, some local, some from far away. At 11:23 p.m., a text came through on my phone, a picture of our house taken from the street. It was dark, grainy, but unmistakably our home. The message below it turned my blood to ice. We're coming in now, try to make it fun for us. Mark grabbed the kids and we huddled in the back of our closet. I could hear Lily whimpering, Jack's ragged breathing. Mark had found an old baseball bat, and he gripped it tightly, his knuckles white. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. We strained our ears for any sound of intrusion, but there was nothing but the storm. Then, a creak. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. I clamped my hand over Lily's mouth to stifle her sob. Mark tensed, raising the bat. The footsteps grew closer. They were in our bedroom now. I could see a sliver of light under the closet door, moving, shifting. The doorknob turned slowly. I closed my eyes, pulling the kids closer. The door flew open. Surprise! Light flooded the closet. I opened my eyes, blinking in confusion. There, standing in the doorway, was my sister Rachel, holding a cake. Behind her, a crowd of familiar faces. Friends, family, all wearing party hats and holding balloons. Happy birthday, sis, Rachel grinned. Got you good, didn't we? I stared, uncomprehending. Birthday. It wasn't my... And then it hit me. It was after midnight. It was my birthday. As understanding dawned, emotions warred within me. Relief that we weren't in danger. Anger at the cruel prank. Confusion about how they had pulled it off. Mark lowered the bat, looking as shell-shocked as I felt. The kids, realizing there was no danger, began to giggle nervously. Rachel's smile faltered as she took in our terrified expressions. Hey, are you okay? It was just a joke. We didn't mean to scare you that bad. I stood up on shaky legs. A joke? Do you have any idea what you put us through? We thought we were going to die. The partygoers in the bedroom shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Rachel set down the cake, her face etched with concern. Whoa, calm down. It was Mark's idea. He said you'd always wanted a surprise party, but you were too smart to fall for the usual tricks. He came up with the whole thing. I turned to Mark, who had the decency to look ashamed. You planned this. He nodded slowly. I'm so sorry, honey. I never meant for it to go this far. It was just supposed to be a little scary, and then funny. But when I saw how frightened you were, I didn't know how to stop it. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for hours suddenly drained away, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. As the full story came out, I learned that Mark had enlisted our friends and family to help with the elaborate ruse. The power outage was faked, limited to just our house. The phone calls were all from people we knew, reading from scripts Mark had prepared. Even the photo of our house had been taken days ago and saved for the prank. They had all thought it was a harmless joke, a way to create an unforgettable surprise. None of them had realized just how terrified we'd become. In the aftermath, as our guests awkwardly ate cake and made stilted conversation, I found myself in a daze. The fear had been real, even if the threat wasn't. Those hours of terror had changed something in me, opened my eyes to how vulnerable we really were. As the last guest left, promising to call tomorrow, Mark approached me cautiously. Can you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. I looked at him, this man I thought I knew so well, and felt a flicker of something I'd never felt before, distrust. I don't know, I answered honestly. I really don't know. That night, as I lay awake in bed, listening to the real storm that had continued to rage outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The safety and security I'd always felt in my home, in my relationships, had been shattered. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. If the people closest to me could convince me I was in mortal danger, what else might they be capable of? The surprise party was over, but I had a feeling the real surprises were just beginning. Certainly, here's a longer, more detailed story following the same parameters. The moment I heard the first whisper coming from the old radio in my grandfather's attic, I knew my life was about to change forever. What I didn't realize was how deep the rabbit hole would go, or how it would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I decided to finally clean out my late grandfather's home. He'd passed away 3 months ago, leaving behind a Victorian mansion filled with a lifetime of memories and secrets. I'd been putting off the task, partly out of grief, partly out of a strange, inexplicable dread I couldn't quite place. As I sifted through dusty boxes and forgotten heirlooms in the attic, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. Pulling it out, I found myself holding an antique radio, its Art Deco design a relic of a bygone era. On a whim, I plugged it in, not really expecting it to work after all these years. At first, there was nothing but static. But as I fiddled with the dial, a voice emerged from the crackling white noise. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakably there. "Help us," it whispered. "Find the key. Open the door." I nearly dropped the radio in shock. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe the radio was picking up a modern station, broadcasting some old-time radio drama. But as I continued to listen, the voice became clearer, more urgent. "Thomas, if you're hearing this, you must act quickly. They're coming. The shadow men are coming." My blood ran cold. Thomas was my grandfather's name. This message, it couldn't be for him, could it? And what were the shadow men? Before I could ponder further, I heard a noise downstairs. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. But that was impossible. I was alone here, the only one with a key. Heart pounding. I crept down the attic stairs, the radio clutched tightly to my chest. The house was eerily quiet now, the footsteps gone. As I reached the second-floor landing, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The door to my grandfather's study, always locked, always off limits, was slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. The study looked undisturbed at first glance, books lining the walls, the old leather chair behind the massive oak desk. But then I noticed it. On the desk, illuminated by a shaft of late afternoon sunlight, was a small golden key. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and warm to the touch, as if it had just been held. As I examined it, I noticed tiny inscriptions along its surface, symbols I didn't recognize, but which seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. The radio in my hands crackled to life again. "The key," the voice said, louder now. "You've found it. Now you must find the door. Hurry before they realize." A sudden gust of wind blew through the study, ruffling papers and sending a chill down my spine. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there. But I was alone. Or was I? Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow, darker than it should be, detached itself from the wall and slid across the floor. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. The shadow men. They were real. Panic rising in my throat. I ran from the study, down the stairs, heading for the front door. But as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The key in my hand pulsed warmly, almost like a heartbeat, and I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that I couldn't leave. Not yet. There was something I had to do first. I turned back, scanning the entrance hall with new eyes, and there, hidden in plain sight, I saw it. A door I'd never noticed before, blending almost seamlessly with the wood paneling. At its center was a small, ornate keyhole. With shaking hands, I inserted the golden key. It fit perfectly. As I turned it, I heard a series of clicks, like tumblers falling into place. The door swung open silently, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. The radio whispered once more. Quickly now, enter and all will be revealed. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. I could turn back now, pretend none of this had happened, go back to my normal life. But I knew that wasn't really an option. Whatever was happening, I was part of it now, and I needed answers. Steeling myself, I began to descend the stairs. The door closed behind me of its own accord, plunging me into total darkness. But as I continued down, a faint blue glow began to emanate from the walls, providing just enough light to see by. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper and deeper underground. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, they ended abruptly in another door. This one was made of a dark metal I didn't recognize, covered in the same shifting symbols as the key. I didn't need to use the key this time. As soon as I touched the door, it swung open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. And what I saw inside made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The chamber was filled with swirling lights and floating symbols, like a three-dimensional projection of the universe itself. In the center stood a group of figures, their faces obscured by hoods, and at their feet, lying motionless on the ground, was my grandfather. One of the figures turned to me, lowering their hood. I gasped as I recognized the face. It was my mother, but her eyes were different, glowing with an otherworldly light. "Welcome, child," she said, her voice echoing with power. "We've been expecting you." As I stood there, the radio still clutched in my hands, I realized that this was just the beginning. The life I thought I knew was over, and a new, stranger chapter was about to begin. My grandfather wasn't dead, at least, not in the way I'd thought. My mother wasn't who I'd always believed her to be. And I was part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The figure that looked like my mother extended her hand. "It's time for you to learn the truth about your heritage, about the war we've been fighting in the shadows for centuries." I hesitated for a moment, my mind reeling from everything I'd seen and heard. But then I thought of the Shadowmen, of the urgency in the radio's whispers. Whatever was happening, whatever secrets my family had been keeping, I needed to know. I took her hand, and as I did, the chamber around us began to shift and change. Images flashed before my eyes, battles fought in secret throughout history, rituals performed under moonlight, sacrifices made to keep the darkness at bay. I saw my ancestors, generation after generation, playing their part in this hidden war, and I saw my own face, reflected in a shimmering pool of light. But it wasn't quite me. This version was older, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much. A possible future, I realized, a future I could choose to embrace or reject. As the visions faded, I found myself back in the chamber, surrounded by the hooded figures. My mother, or the being that looked like her, smiled. "Now you know," she said. "The choice is yours. Will you take up the mantle, continue the fight, or will you turn away, try to forget what you've seen?" I looked around the chamber, at the swirling lights and ancient symbols. I thought of the Shadowmen, of the whispers from the radio, of the life I'd lived in ignorance for so long, and I knew there was only one choice I could make. "I'm in," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Tell me what I need to do." As the words left my mouth, I felt a shift in the air. The hooded figures bowed their heads, and my grandfather stirred, opening his eyes for the first time. "And so it begins," he said, his voice weak but filled with pride. "The next chapter in our family's legacy." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead, I was ready. The ordinary world I'd known was gone, replaced by one of magic, shadows, and ancient wars. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because now, finally, I knew who I was meant to be. The scratching at my window wasn't the wind. I knew because the trees stood perfectly still, their branches etched against the moonlit sky like skeletal fingers reaching for the stars. No, this sound was deliberate, insistent, and it was getting louder. I'd come to this cabin in the woods to escape the chaos of city life, to find some peace and quiet. Now, as I lay frozen in my bed, ears straining to catch every little noise, I realized just how quiet it could get out here, and how that silence could be shattered in an instant. It had started as a perfect getaway. I'd arrived at the cabin yesterday afternoon, the sun still high in the sky, warming the pine-scented air. The cabin itself was charming, all weathered wood and rustic charm, with a wide porch perfect for sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. The rental listing had promised seclusion, and it delivered. The nearest neighbor was miles away, leaving me surrounded by nothing but forest and the occasional chirp of a bird. I'd spent the day unpacking, exploring the nearby trails, and soaking in the tranquility. As night fell, I'd curled up on the couch with a good book, relishing the absence of car horns and sirens. The only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace and the gentle hum of crickets outside. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that I first felt it, a prickle on the back of my neck like I was being watched. I shook it off, chiding myself for being paranoid. I was alone out here, after all. There was nothing to fear. But now, as I lay wide awake in the dead of night, that feeling had returned tenfold. The scratching at my window had stopped, replaced by an even more unsettling sound. Footsteps, crunching on the gravel outside. I held my breath, willing my heart to stop pounding so loudly in my chest. Maybe it was just an animal, I told myself. A deer, or even a bear. They were common in these parts, right? The footsteps circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. They paused at each window, and I could swear I heard the sound of something, breathing heavily. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. No signal. Of course. I was miles from the nearest cell tower. The footsteps had completed their circuit of the cabin and were now on the front porch. The old wooden boards creaked under the weight of whatever was out there. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie here, waiting for... what? I didn't want to think about it. Slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet as I crept towards the bedroom door. I eased it open, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. The main room of the cabin was bathed in silvery moonlight streaming through the windows. Everything looked different in the dark, familiar shapes transformed into looming shadows. I made my way to the front door, my heart in my throat. There was a baseball bat in the umbrella stand. I'd seen it earlier and thought it was an odd place for it. Now, I was grateful. I wrapped my fingers around the smooth wood, the weight of it reassuring in my hands. The porch had gone quiet. Too quiet. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Maybe whatever it was had gone away. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I was about to turn back to bed when I heard it, a soft thud, like something being set down on the porch. Then, unmistakably, the sound of the doorknob slowly turning. I stumbled back, raising the bat. The door wasn't locked. I'd been so caught up in the peace and safety of the woods, I hadn't even thought to lock it. The door began to open, achingly slow. I could see a sliver of the night sky, then more, then nothing. The door stood open, but there was no one there. I stood frozen, bat still raised, staring at the empty doorway. The crickets had gone silent. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. After what felt like an eternity, I lowered the bat and took a tentative step forward. I had to know. I had to see. I peered out onto the porch. Empty. I took another step, then another, until I was standing fully outside. The night air was cool on my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. I looked left, then right. Nothing but shadows and moonlight. I was about to go back inside when something caught my eye. There, at the edge of the porch, barely visible in the dim light, footprints. But not animal tracks like I'd hoped. These were unmistakably human. My breath caught in my throat as I knelt down to examine them. They were fresh, the mud still damp, and they were big, much bigger than my own feet. I followed the trail with my eyes. They led from the woods, up onto the porch, and then my blood ran cold. The footprints led directly to my bedroom window. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the side of the cabin. There, under my window, were more footprints, and something else. Long, deep scratches in the wood, right where the window met the wall. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was real. This was happening. I had to get out of here. I ran back into the cabin, slamming the door behind me and finally locking it. I rushed to my room, throwing on the first clothes I could find and shoving my feet into my hiking boots. As I was grabbing my car keys, I heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. But this time, they weren't slow and stealthy. They were running. I bolted for the back door, wrenching it open and plunging into the night. I could hear heavy breathing behind me, twigs snapping under pursuing footsteps. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, branches whipping at my face. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line onto the gravel road where I'd parked my car. It sat there, a gleaming beacon of hope in the moonlight. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush, getting closer by the second. The key slid home. I wrenched the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut just as a dark figure emerged from the trees. I jammed the key into the ignition, silently praying to whatever might be listening. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. As I peeled away, kicking up gravel, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror. A tall, broad-shouldered figure standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I didn't slow down until I hit the main highway, the lights of passing cars never looking so beautiful. I drove straight through until morning, not stopping until I was safely back in the city. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? I had no proof, just a story that sounded crazy even to my own ears. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind rustles the trees outside my apartment, I remember the scratching at my window, the footsteps on the porch, the figure in my rearview mirror, and I wonder, what if I hadn't woken up? What if I hadn't heard the scratching? What was out there in those woods, and what did it want with me? I'll never go back to that cabin, but a part of me knows the truth. Whatever was out there that night is still there, waiting in the shadows of the forest, waiting for the next person to let their guard down, to forget to lock their door, to dismiss that feeling of being watched as just their imagination. Because sometimes the monsters are real, and sometimes they leave footprints. The moment I realized my passenger had vanished, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night. 1 second he was there, a solid presence in my peripheral vision, and the next, nothing. Just an empty seat and the steady drumming of rain on the roof of my car. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the countryside. The rain had started about an hour into my journey, a light drizzle at first that had quickly become a torrential downpour. I was tired, my eyes strained from peering through the sheet of water cascading down my windshield. That's when I saw him. A lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, looking thoroughly drenched and miserable. I'm not usually one for picking up hitchhikers, but something about the desperation in his posture made me pull over. He climbed in quickly, bringing with him the smell of wet earth and something else I couldn't quite place. "Thanks," he said, his voice oddly quiet beneath the pounding of the rain. "I thought I'd be stuck out there all night." I nodded, pulling back onto the road. "Where you headed?" I asked, glancing over at him. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably in his early 20s. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his chin onto his already soaked jacket. "And just up the road a ways," he replied vaguely, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'll let you know when to stop." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers, the only sound besides the rain. I was about to ask him where exactly he was going when I noticed something strange. The rain on his side of the car wasn't running down the window like it should. Instead, it seemed to be avoiding him, as if there was an invisible barrier between him and the glass. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. When I looked again, everything seemed normal. Must be more tired than I thought, I mused, shaking my head slightly. "You okay?" he asked, and I nearly jumped. It was the first time he'd spoken since getting in the car. "Yeah, fine," I said quickly. "Just a long night of driving." He nodded, then turned back to the window. "It's a bad night to be out," he said softly. "You never know what might be lurking in the dark." A chill ran down my spine at his words, though I couldn't say why. I was about to respond when my phone rang, the sudden noise making me start. I fumbled for it, keeping one hand on the wheel. "Hello," I answered, grateful for the distraction. There was nothing but static on the other end. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, faint and distorted, but unmistakable. "Help me," it said. "Please, help me." I frowned, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "Hello, who is this?" More static, then, "He's not who you think he is. Get out. Get out now." The call cut off abruptly. I lowered the phone, my heart racing. What the hell was that about? I glanced over at my passenger, intending to make some joke about bad reception, but the words died in my throat. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the wet road before coming to a stop. I twisted in my seat, looking into the back, but it was empty too. He was gone, vanished into thin air. For a long moment, I just sat there, the engine idling, rain hammering on the roof. This couldn't be happening. People don't just disappear from moving cars. I must have imagined him. That was it. I was tired. It was dark. My mind was playing tricks on me. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The seat beside me was still wet from his clothes. I could still smell that strange, earthy scent he'd brought with him. With shaking hands, I put the car back in drive and pulled off to the side of the road. I needed to think, to figure out what was going on. That's when my phone rang again. I stared at it, vibrating innocently on the passenger seat where I'd dropped it. The screen showed an unknown number, the same one as before. My hand hovered over it, part of me screaming not to answer, but another part knowing I had to. I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you pick him up?" The voice was clearer this time, but still distorted, as if coming from very far away. "Don't you know it's dangerous to let strangers into your car?" "Who is this?" I demanded, fear giving way to anger. "What's going on?" "He's not gone," the voice said, ignoring my questions. "He's still there, watching, waiting." The call cut off again. I lowered the phone slowly, my eyes darting around the car, half expecting to see my vanished passenger materialize out of thin air. Nothing. Just the rain and the dark and the empty road stretching out before me. I had to get out of here. I put the car in drive, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, but something stopped me from pressing down. A feeling, an instinct I couldn't explain. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. Slowly, I turned to look out the passenger side window. For a split second, I saw him. Not in the car, but outside, standing in the rain. Our eyes met, and he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. I floored it. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt as I took off. My heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I drove for what felt like hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, constantly checking my rearview mirror. But there was nothing behind me except the empty, rain-soaked road. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I needed to stop, to rest, to try and make sense of what had happened. I spotted a sign for a rest area coming up and decided to pull in. The parking lot was empty, save for a single semi-truck, its driver presumably asleep in the cab. I parked as far away from it as possible, killing the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition, just in case. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes and taking deep breaths. Okay, I thought, let's think about this logically. People don't just vanish into thin air. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd dozed off at the wheel. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The wet seat, the phone calls, it had all been real. I was startled out of my thoughts by a tapping on my window. My eyes flew open, my heart leaping into my throat. It was a police officer, peering in at me with concern. I rolled down the window, trying to compose myself. "Everything all right?" he asked, shining his flashlight into the car. "You've been sitting here for a while." I blinked, confused. I'd only just pulled in, hadn't I? But a glance at the clock on my dashboard showed that nearly an hour had passed. "I'm fine," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just taking a break from driving. The rain, you know." He nodded sympathetically. "It's a bad night to be out. You heading somewhere in particular?" I opened my mouth to answer, then paused. Where was I going? I couldn't remember. It was as if the events of the night had wiped everything else from my mind. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I think I got turned around in the storm." The officer's expression changed, just slightly. A flicker of something, suspicion, concern, crossed his face. "Why don't you come with me to the station?" he suggested. "We can get you a cup of coffee, maybe help you figure out where you're headed." I hesitated. On one hand, the idea of being somewhere safe, surrounded by people, was incredibly appealing. On the other, well, after the night I'd had, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone or anything. Before I could decide, my phone rang again. The officer frowned. "You should answer that," he said. "Might be someone wondering where you are." With a shaking hand, I picked up the phone. Unknown number. "Of course." "Hello," I said, bracing myself for whatever might come next. "Don't go with him." It was the same voice as before. "He's not a real cop. Get out of there, now." The call ended. I looked up at the officer, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a friend checking in. You know what? I think I'm okay to keep driving. Thanks for checking on me." He didn't move away from the car. "You sure? It's no trouble to come to the station." "I'm sure," I said, starting the engine. "Thanks again." He stepped back, but I could feel his eyes on me as I pulled out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, watching me drive away, just like the hitchhiker had. As I merged back onto the highway, my phone buzzed with a text, unknown number. "Keep driving," it read. "Don't stop until morning, and whatever you do, don't pick up any more hitchhikers." I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The rain continued to pour down, and somewhere out in the darkness, I knew he was still out there. Watching, waiting. And I drove on into the night, chased by ghosts and shadows, not knowing if I was fleeing from danger or driving straight into it. The moment I heard her voice on the other end of the line, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "You have to help me. I'm trapped somewhere in the building. I've been a night security guard at Oakwood Tower for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunken office workers who'd fallen asleep at their desks, the occasional raccoon that managed to sneak in through the loading dock, even a minor fire in the server room once. But this was something entirely different. My name's Mike, and up until tonight, my job had been pretty straightforward. Make my rounds, check the cameras, and make sure nothing goes bump in the night. The building's usually empty after hours, just me and the hum of the air conditioning. I was in the middle of my 2 a.m. round when the call came through on the emergency line. It's a direct line to the security desk meant for real emergencies. In 3 years, it had never rung once. "Ma'am, calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you tell me where you are?" I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's dark. There are no windows. I think I'm in some kind of storage room." I frowned, scanning the bank of security monitors in front of me. Every floor, every hallway, every stairwell was visible, and they were all empty. "How did you get in there?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, and I could hear the panic rising in her voice. "I was working late, and then... I don't remember. Please, you have to find me. He said he'd be back soon." A chill ran down my spine. Who said, "Is there someone else in the building?" But the line had gone dead. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of prank, right? But the fear in her voice had sounded so real. I keyed up the camera feeds from earlier in the evening, scanning for any sign of someone working late. Nothing. The last employee had left at 8:47 p.m., and no one had entered the building since. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed for the elevator. Prank or not, I had to check it out. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of movement on one of the monitors, just for a second, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. A shadow, moving across the lobby. But that was impossible. I was the only one here. The elevator pinged as it reached the top floor. I stepped out, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air up here felt different, heavier somehow. I shook off the feeling and started my search. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. The building was as empty as it had been all night. But as I turned to head back to the elevator, I heard it, a soft thump, coming from somewhere above me. There shouldn't be anything above me. I was on the top floor. Or was I? I remembered something then, a rumor I'd heard when I first started this job. Something about a hidden floor, not on any of the official blueprints. I'd always dismissed it as office gossip. But now, I ran my flashlight along the wall near the elevator, looking for anything out of place. And there it was, a slight discoloration in the paint, about the size of a handprint. I pressed my palm against it, and to my shock, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow staircase. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Mike, you there?" It was Tom, my relief for the morning shift. He wasn't due for hours yet. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, my voice shaky. "Tom, something weird is going on. I think there might be someone in the building." "What? That's impossible. I'm looking at the cameras right now. Place is empty." I was about to tell him about the hidden staircase when I heard it again. That soft thump, closer this time, coming from up those stairs. "Tom, listen. I need you to call the police. Tell them." The radio went dead. Not just silent, but completely dead. I tried the power button, but nothing happened. Great. I stood there for a moment, flashlight trained on the dark staircase, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told me to get out, to wait for backup. But what if that woman was really up there? What if she was in danger? Taking a deep breath, I started up the stairs. The air grew colder as I ascended, the silence broken only by my footsteps and ragged breathing. The beam of my flashlight seemed to grow dimmer with each step, the darkness pressing in around me. I reached the top of the stairs and found myself in a long, narrow hallway. Unlike the rest of the building, with its modern decor and bright colors, this place felt old. The walls were bare concrete, the floor dusty and cracked. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Security, is anyone here?" No response, just that heavy, oppressive silence. I made my way down the hall, checking each door as I passed. They were all locked. Solid metal with no windows. What was this place? At the end of the hall, I found a door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creak of rusted hinges. The room beyond was pitch black, my flashlight barely penetrating the gloom. It looked like some kind of old office, with dusty filing cabinets lining the walls and a large desk in the center. As I swept my light across the room, it caught something that made my heart stop. A hand, pale and limp, visible just behind the desk. "Oh God," I muttered, rushing forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I rounded the desk and my flashlight illuminated a scene that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It wasn't just a hand, it was a body, a woman, young, with long dark hair obscuring her face. She wasn't moving. I knelt beside her, reaching out to check for a pulse. But as my fingers touched her skin, I recoiled. She was ice cold. And then she moved. It wasn't the movement of someone unconscious stirring. It was jerky, unnatural. Her head snapped up, hair falling away from her face, and I found myself staring into eyes that were completely, utterly black. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the desk. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. The thing that looked like a woman began to rise, its movements twitchy and wrong, like a puppet with tangled strings. Its mouth opened and I heard that voice again, the same one from the phone. "You came," it said, but the voice wasn't coming from its mouth. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "We've been waiting for so long." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I could hear it behind me, not running, but moving in that horrible, jerky way. I reached the stairs and practically threw myself down them, taking them 3 at a time. I burst out into the familiar hallway of the top floor, not daring to look back. The elevator was there, doors open, waiting. I dove inside, frantically pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, I saw it. The thing from upstairs, standing at the end of the hall. It tilted its head, an almost curious gesture, and then smiled. It wasn't a human smile. The elevator seemed to take an eternity to reach the lobby. When the doors finally opened, I ran, out through the lobby, past the security desk with its bank of monitors, out into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the building, and there, in a window on the top floor, I saw a figure, watching me. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. It wasn't until I was miles away that I realized I was shaking. I never went back to Oakwood Tower. I quit the next day, over the phone. They probably think I'm crazy. Hell, maybe I am. But I know what I saw, what I heard. Sometimes, late at night, my phone will ring. Unknown number. I never answer it. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the shadows are long, I think I can hear a voice, whispering, waiting. And I wonder, not for the first time, what would have happened if I hadn't gone up those stairs, if I had just dismissed it as a prank and gone about my night. But deep down, I know the truth. it wouldn't have mattered. Because whatever was in that building, whatever was pretending to be a woman in distress, it had been waiting for someone to answer that call, to climb those hidden stairs, waiting for me. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I fear it's still waiting. That one day I'll turn a corner and find myself back in that hallway, with that thing smiling its inhuman smile, waiting to finish what it started. The first time I saw him standing over my bed, I thought I was dreaming. His silhouette loomed in the darkness, silent and still. I blinked, and he was gone. If only I had known then that my nightmare was just beginning. I'd moved into the apartment about a month ago. It was nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. But I was desperate for a place of my own after a messy breakup, and when the landlord, Mr. Keegan, showed me around, I was too relieved to notice the way his eyes lingered a little too long, or how he seemed to know the exact layout of the apartment without looking. The first few weeks were uneventful. I settled in, unpacked my boxes, and started to feel like I was getting my life back on track. But then the little things started happening. A book I swore I'd left on the coffee table would be back on the shelf. The milk in the fridge would be lower than I remembered. My favorite mug would be in a different cupboard. At first, I chalked it up to absent-mindedness. I was stressed, working long hours at my new job. It was understandable that I might misplace things or forget where I'd put them. But as the days went by, the feeling that something was off grew stronger. I started noticing other things too. Sometimes, when I came home from work, the air in the apartment felt different, as if someone had been there. There was a lingering scent I couldn't quite place, musty and vaguely unpleasant. And once, I could have sworn I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom in the middle of the night, but when I got up to check, there was no one there. It was about 3 weeks in when I woke up to find my bedroom window open. I always kept it locked, especially since I was on the ground floor. The cool night air sent a shiver down my spine as I got up to close it. That's when I noticed the muddy footprint on the carpet just inside the window. My heart raced as I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. Someone had been in my room while I slept. I called the police, but they didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing missing. They suggested I might have left the window open myself and forgotten about it. The footprint, probably tracked in by my own shoes. I wanted to believe them, but deep down, I knew they were wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside had me sitting bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. It was during one of these moments of heightened alertness that I saw him for the first time. A dark figure, standing at the foot of my bed, motionless. I gasped, fumbling for the lamp on my nightstand. By the time I got it on, he was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination, a result of stress and lack of sleep. But the incident left me shaken. I started double-checking all the locks before bed, wedging a chair under my bedroom doorknob. I even considered moving out, but the thought of breaking my lease and trying to find a new place was overwhelming. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small security camera, one of those nanny cam types disguised as a digital clock. I set it up on my dresser, angled to capture most of the room. If someone was coming into my apartment, I was going to catch them. For the first few nights, nothing happened. The footage showed only me, tossing and turning in my sleep. But on the fourth night, everything changed. I woke up to my alarm as usual, got ready for work, and headed out. It wasn't until I got home that evening that I remembered to check the camera. What I saw made my blood run cold. The footage started normally enough, me, asleep in bed. But at around 2:30 a.m., the door to my bedroom slowly opened. A figure entered, moving with eerie calmness. It was Mr. Keegan, my landlord. He stood there for a moment, just watching me sleep. Then he started moving around the room, touching things. My hairbrush, the book on my nightstand. He opened my closet, ran his hands over my clothes. All the while, I slept on, oblivious. After about 10 minutes, he approached the bed. I watched in horror as he leaned over me, his face just inches from mine. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, just looking. Then, as silently as he'd entered, he left. I felt sick. The violation, the invasion of my privacy, it was almost too much to bear. But underneath the disgust and fear, another emotion was building. Anger. How dare he? How many times had he done this? How many other tenants had he terrorized? I knew I should call the police, but a part of me hesitated. What if they didn't believe me? What if Mr. Keegan found out and retaliated? No, I needed more evidence. I needed to catch him in the act. So I hatched a plan. The next night, I pretended to go to bed as usual, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, every muscle tense, waiting. The hours ticked by, and just when I was starting to think he wouldn't come, I heard it. The soft click of my front door opening. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he'd hear it. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, as I heard his footsteps approaching my bedroom. The door creaked open. I waited until I felt his presence near the bed. Then, in one swift motion, I sat up and turned on the lamp. Mr. Keegan stood there, frozen like a deer in headlights. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who's been caught but isn't sorry. "You're awake," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Get out," I said, surprised at how steady my own voice sounded. "Get out now, or I'm calling the police." He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "And tell them what? That your landlord used his key to check on his property. I'm allowed to do that, you know. It's in the lease." I reached for my phone, but he was faster. His hand clamped around my wrist, painfully tight. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice now a menacing growl. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." In that moment, I realized how truly dangerous this man was. This wasn't just about invading my privacy. He was unhinged, and I was trapped in a small apartment with him, but I wasn't going to be a victim. Not again. With my free hand, I grabbed the lamp and swung it as hard as I could. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, releasing my wrist. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Out of the bedroom, through the living room, fumbling with the front door lock. I could hear him behind me, cursing, his footsteps unsteady but getting closer. Finally, the door opened, and I burst out into the hallway. I ran down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station 2 blocks away. Breathless and shaking, I told them everything. This time, they listened. They took my statement, looked at the video footage I had on my phone, and sent officers to arrest Mr. Keegan. It turned out I wasn't his first victim. The police found evidence in his apartment linking him to a string of burglaries and stalking incidents across the city. He's in jail now, awaiting trial, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can feel his eyes on me. I moved out of that apartment, of course. Found a new place across town. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. I double-check my locks, keep my curtains drawn. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it survival. Because I learned something from this experience. The monsters we fear as children, the ones lurking in closets or under beds, they're not real. But there are monsters in this world. They walk among us, smile at us, hand us keys to apartments with cheap rent and dark secrets. And sometimes, the only way to defeat them is to shine a light on them, to expose them for what they truly are. It's not easy. It's terrifying, in fact. But it's necessary, because if we don't, they'll just keep lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for their next victim. So if you ever get that feeling, that prickle on the back of your neck that tells you something's not right, listen to it. Trust your instincts. And don't be afraid to turn on the light and face whatever's hiding in the dark. Because sometimes, that's the only way to make the monsters go away. The moment I found the diary, I knew I should have left that godforsaken motel. But curiosity got the better of me, and by the time I realized the gravity of my mistake, it was already too late. It was supposed to be a quick overnight stay, just a pit stop on my cross-country drive to my new job in California. The Pinewood Motel wasn't much to look at, a rundown two-story building that had seen better days, probably sometime back in the 70s. But it was cheap, and I was tired. So I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot just as the sun was setting. The lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The clerk, an older woman with faded tattoos and a permanent scowl, barely looked up from her magazine as she handed me the key to room 8. "Checkout's at 11, she mumbled, already dismissing me. I should have noticed the way her eyes flickered when she said the room number, the slight hesitation in her hand as she passed me the key. But I was exhausted from driving all day, my eyes gritty from staring at endless miles of highway. All I wanted was a shower and a bed. The room was about what I expected: faded wallpaper, a sagging double bed, and a TV that looked old enough to have watched the moon landing. But it was clean enough, and the water pressure in the shower was surprisingly good. I was just starting to think I might get a decent night's sleep after all when I noticed it. The corner of something poking out from under the bed. Probably just trash left by a previous guest, I thought. But when I bent down to look, I realized it was a book, a diary, to be exact. Old and battered, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. But at the time, it seemed harmless enough. Just a forgotten journal, probably full of someone's boring vacation memories or work notes. The first few pages were exactly that. Mundane entries about a business trip, complaints about the weather, nothing exciting. But as I flipped through, the tone started to change. The handwriting became more frantic, the entries shorter and more disjointed. "Something's wrong with this place," when one entry read. "The walls, they move when I'm not looking. And the noises at night, God, the noises." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't stop reading. The next entry was even worse. "I tried to leave today. The door wouldn't open. It was locked. But I know I didn't lock it. When I finally got it open, the hallway, it wasn't the same. It went on forever. Doors on both sides as far as I could see. This isn't possible. This isn't real." My hands were shaking now, but I kept turning pages. The entries became more and more disturbing. The writer talked about shadows moving on their own, about voices whispering from the walls, about something that came in the night, something that stood over the bed watching. The last entry was scrawled in shaky handwriting, barely legible. "If you're reading this, get out. Get out now, before it's too late. Before you become part of this place, like I have, like we all have." I slammed the diary shut, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank left by a previous guest to scare people. But as I sat there, the room suddenly felt different, colder. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, somehow. I decided I wasn't going to stick around to find out if the diary was real or not. I grabbed my bags and headed for the door. But when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was like the door was welded shut. Panic started to set in. I ran to the window, thinking I could climb out, but it wouldn't open either. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The parking lot outside, which had been nearly empty when I arrived, was now full of cars. Old cars, from every decade stretching back to the 50s. And they were all covered in a thick layer of dust, keen as if they hadn't moved in years. I backed away from the window, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of hallucination. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and counted to 10. When I opened them again, everything would be normal. 1, 2, 3. I could hear something now, a faint scratching sound coming from the walls. 4, 5, 6. Was it just my imagination? Or was the room getting smaller? 7, 8, 9. The scratching was louder now, accompanied by whispers too faint to make out. 10. I opened my eyes. The room looked the same, but something felt different. The air was heavier, charged with a strange energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. And the door was open now, revealing a hallway that seemed to stretch on into infinity. I knew I shouldn't go out there. Every instinct was screaming at me to stay put, to wait for morning when surely this would all turn out to be some vivid nightmare. But I couldn't stay in that room. Not with those whispers growing louder. Not with the shadows that seemed to be reaching for me. So I stepped out into the hallway. It was like entering another world. The cheap carpet and peeling wallpaper were gone, replaced by dark, polished wood and elegant wallpaper that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Doors lined both sides of the hallway, stretching as far as I could see in both directions. I started walking, telling myself I just needed to find the stairs, to get to the lobby and out of this insane place. But no matter how far I went, there were no stairs, no elevator, no way down, just an endless procession of doors. I don't know how long I walked. It could have been minutes, or hours, or days. Time seemed to have no meaning here. Sometimes I thought I heard voices behind the doors, muffled conversations or muted sobs. Once, I swear I heard my own voice, laughing at some forgotten joke. Finally, exhausted and on the verge of a breakdown, I stopped in front of a door that looked just like all the others. I don't know why I chose this one. Maybe some part of me knew, even then. I turned the handle, and it opened easily. Inside was my room. Not the room I had checked into, but my childhood bedroom, exactly as it had been when I was 10 years old. My old toys were scattered on the floor, posters of long-forgotten bands on the walls. And there, sitting on the bed, was me. 10-year-old me, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're finally here," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "We've been waiting for so long." I backed away, shaking my head. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I turned to run, but the hallway was gone. In its place was another room, this one from my college dorm, and another version of me, older now, sitting at the desk. "Don't you remember?" this one asked. "You checked in. Just like we all did." I spun around, but every direction I turned, there was another room, another version of me. My first apartment, my old office, places I'd stayed on vacations or business trips, and in each one, another me, all watching with those same sad eyes. "You can't leave," they said in unison. "None of us can. This is where we belong now." I felt something inside me start to crack. Memories came flooding back, memories I didn't know I had, of checking into this motel not just once, but dozens, hundreds of times, of reading that diary, of trying to escape, of always ending up back here. I sank to my knees, the truth finally sinking in. I had never left. I had never even started that cross-country trip. I had been here all along, trapped in this impossible place, reliving the same nightmare over and over again. As the realization washed over me, I felt the motel shift around me. The rooms faded away, and I was back in room 8. It looked just as it had when I first checked in, right down to the diary peeking out from under the bed. I picked it up with trembling hands and opened it to the last page. There, in my own handwriting, was a new entry. "If you're reading this, get out. Get out now, before it's too late, before you become part of this place, like I have, like we all have. I put the diary back where I found it and sat on the bed, waiting. Soon, there would be a knock on the door. A new guest checking into room 8, and the cycle would begin again. Because that's the thing about the Pinewood Motel. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. The moment I saw his eyes lock onto me, I knew this peaceful fishing trip was about to turn into a fight for survival. There's a certain look predators get when they've chosen their prey, and this man had it in spades. I'd come to Lake Hollow to escape the chaos of city life, to find some solitude and maybe catch a few fish. It was a beautiful spot, tucked away in the mountains, far from the nearest town. The kind of place where you could lose yourself for days, surrounded by nothing but trees and water. I arrived early that morning, just as the mist was lifting off the lake. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I found a quiet spot on the shore, away from the few other fishermen I'd seen setting up. Perfect, I thought. Just me and the fish. For the first few hours, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore, the occasional splash of a jumping fish, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I'd caught a couple of decent-sized trout and was feeling pretty good about my decision to come out here. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing about 50 yards down the shore, rod in hand, but he wasn't fishing. He was watching me. I tried to shrug it off at first. Maybe he was just sizing up the competition, seeing if I was having any luck. But there was something off about the way he stood. Too still, too focused. I cast my line again, trying to ignore the prickle of unease creeping up my spine. When I glanced back, he had moved closer. Not much, just a few yards, but enough that I could see his face more clearly now. He was older than me, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and a scraggly beard. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, cold, calculating, hungry. I reeled in my line, deciding it was time to move to a new spot. As I packed up my gear, I kept him in my peripheral vision. He mirrored my movements, gathering his own things. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't normal behavior, not by a long shot. I headed further down the shore, away from where I'd parked my car. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. But I thought if I could just put some distance between us, maybe he'd lose interest. I found another spot and set up again, my hands shaking slightly as I baited my hook. I tried to focus on the water, on the rhythm of casting and reeling, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sure enough, when I turned to scan the shoreline, there he was, closer now, maybe 30 yards away. He wasn't even pretending to fish anymore, just standing there staring at me with those predator eyes. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You looking for a good spot? There's plenty of room down that way." He didn't respond, didn't even blink, just kept staring. That's when I knew I was in real trouble. I abandoned my gear and started walking quickly towards the trail that led back to the parking lot. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps crunching on the gravel shore. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. The trail was narrow, winding through dense forest. I picked up my pace, my breath coming in short gasps. The trees seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I stumbled over a root, catching myself just before I fell. That's when I heard him speak for the first time. "No use running," he called, his voice rough and cold. "Ain't nowhere to go out here but the water or the woods. And trust me, you don't want either." I ran. I didn't care about the direction anymore. Didn't care about finding my way back to my car. All that mattered was putting distance between me and him. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning with each breath. I could hear him behind me, moving with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew these woods well. He wasn't running, just maintaining a steady pace, like he knew he'd catch me eventually. I burst into a small clearing and paused for a moment, trying to get my bearings. That's when I saw it. An old, dilapidated cabin half hidden in the trees. Without thinking, I sprinted towards it. Maybe I could barricade myself inside, buy some time to think. The door was hanging off its hinges. I pushed inside, the musty smell of decay hitting me like a wall. The cabin was small, just one room with a few pieces of broken furniture scattered around. No windows, no back door. I'd trapped myself. I could hear him outside now, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the creaky porch. My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. There was an old fireplace poker leaning against the wall. I grabbed it, the rusted metal rough against my palm. "Come on out," he called, his voice closer now. "Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be." I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, the poker raised and ready. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The door creaked open slowly. I held my breath, waiting. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. For a split second, he didn't see me. That was all the chance I needed. I swung the poker with all my strength, connecting with his shoulder. He let out a roar of pain and anger, stumbling backwards. I didn't wait to see if he'd fall. I ran, ducking under his grasping arms and out into the clearing. But he was faster than I expected. Before I could make it to the tree line, he tackled me from behind. We went down hard. The breath knocked out of me as I hit the ground. He flipped me over, his weight pinning me down. Up close, his eyes were even more terrifying. Pale blue, almost colorless, with a madness burning in their depths. "Thought you could get away, did you?" he snarled, his face inches from mine. "Nobody gets away out here. This is my lake, my woods, and you? You're just another fool who wandered into my hunting grounds." I struggled, trying to buck him off, but he was too strong. His hands found my throat, squeezing. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as I gasped for air. In that moment, as consciousness started to slip away, something snapped inside me. A primal, desperate need to survive took over. My hands scrabbled in the dirt beside me, fingers closing around a rock. With the last of my strength, I brought it up hard against the side of his head. The impact was like a thunderclap. His grip loosened, and he toppled sideways, stunned. I scrambled to my feet, sucking in great lungfuls of air. He was already starting to get up, shaking his head to clear it. I ran. I ran like I've never run before in my life. Through the trees, over fallen logs, splashing through streams. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that eventually, I burst out of the tree line and found myself back at the lake shore. And there, like a miracle, was the parking lot. My car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. As I peeled out of the lot, spraying gravel, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the woods. He was there, watching me drive away. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of his stare. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway, putting miles between me and Lake Hollow. It wasn't until I was safely back in the city that I finally let myself break down, the full weight of what had happened crashing over me. I reported it to the police, of course. They sent officers out to investigate them, but they didn't find much. Just an abandoned cabin in the woods and some trampled underbrush. No sign of the man who'd chased me. They chalked it up to a misunderstanding, suggested maybe I'd overreacted to a fellow hiker. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Those eyes, that voice, they haunt my dreams now. I don't go fishing anymore. Don't go hiking or camping either. The peace I used to find in nature has been replaced by a constant gnawing fear. Because I know he's still out there in those woods on by that lake, waiting, watching, hunting. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, somehow, he'll find me again. That our unfinished business will finally come to its bloody conclusion. Until then, I'll stay in the city, surrounded by people and noise and light. Because the silence of the wilderness now holds only terror for me. A reminder that sometimes, The most dangerous predators are the ones that look just like us. The moment I opened that package, I knew I'd stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. What I didn't know was that it would turn my quiet hotel stay into a nightmarish game of cat and mouse. I'd checked into the Pinewood Hotel late that evening, exhausted from a long day of business meetings. It was one of those generic chain hotels, nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable enough for a night or two. The lobby was quiet. Just me and the bored-looking receptionist who barely looked up from her computer as she handed me my key card. "Room 317, she said, her voice as bland as the beige walls around us. "Elevators to your left, checkouts at 11. I nodded my thanks and headed up, my wheeled suitcase bumping along behind me. The third-floor hallway was deserted, the only sound the soft hum of the ice machine at the far end. I found my room easily enough and swiped the card, eager to kick off my shoes and fall into bed. That's when I saw it. A small package, about the size of a shoebox, sitting right in front of my door. At first, I thought maybe I'd dropped something from my briefcase key, but as I bent to pick it up, I realized it wasn't mine. The label was addressed to someone named J. Marston, definitely not me. I should have just left it there. Should have called the front desk and let them deal with it. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the package. It was surprisingly heavy for its size and brought it into the room with me. Once inside, I set it on the desk and took a closer look. The return address had been blacked out with marker, and there was no postage stamp. This hadn't come through the mail. Someone had hand-delivered it. I told myself I was just going to take a quick peek, make sure it wasn't anything that needed immediate attention. That's what I told myself as I carefully peeled back the brown paper wrapping. Inside was a plain cardboard box. No markings, no labels. Just an ordinary box that could have held anything from office supplies to a pair of shoes. But when I lifted the lid, I knew instantly that this was anything but ordinary. The box was filled with documents, stacks of papers, file folders, and what looked like photographs. But it was the top sheet that caught my eye, a memo printed on official-looking letterhead. As I scanned the first few lines, my blood ran cold. It was about a cover-up, a massive, corporate cover-up involving toxic waste dumping, falsified environmental reports, and what appeared to be several deaths that had been swept under the rug. Names were mentioned, big names, CEOs and politicians I recognized from the news. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. "Jay, this is everything. Be careful. They're watching." My hands were shaking as I set the paper down. This was big, bigger than big. This was the kind of information that could bring down companies, end careers, maybe even land people in prison. And somehow, it had ended up outside my hotel room door. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. What should I do? Call the police, the media? But as I reached for my phone, a thought stopped me cold. Whoever had left this package thought they were delivering it to J. Marston, which meant they knew what room he was supposed to be in. Which meant I jumped up and double-checked the lock on my door, my heart pounding. Then I went to the window, carefully peeling back the curtain to peer out into the parking lot. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just a few cars scattered under the yellow glow of the streetlights. But then I noticed it, a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running. And inside, I could just make out the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching the hotel. I let the curtain fall back into place, trying to calm my breathing. This was bad, really bad. I was in a room that wasn't supposed to be mine, with information I wasn't supposed to have. And there were people out there who clearly wanted that information back. I had to get out of there. But how? If they were watching the front of the hotel, they'd see me leave. And I couldn't very well walk out with a mysterious package under my arm. I looked at the box again, an idea forming. Quickly, I emptied my suitcase, shoving my clothes into the hotel room drawers. Then I carefully transferred the contents of the box into my suitcase, making sure everything was exactly as I'd found it. The empty box and wrapping paper I stuffed into the trash can, burying them under crumpled tissues and empty water bottles. Just as I zipped up the suitcase, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. "Housekeeping," a voice called. I froze. It was nearly midnight. Why would housekeeping be coming around now? "No, thank you," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm about to go to sleep." There was a pause, then another knock, harder this time. "Sir, we need to change the sheets. Hotel policy." I didn't respond this time, my eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape route. The window? No, I was 3 stories up. The bathroom? A dead end. The knocking had turned to pounding now. "Open up, Mr. Marston. We know you're in there." In that moment, I made a decision. I grabbed my suitcase and ran for the door. I threw it open, catching the man on the other side off guard. He was big, dressed in a hotel uniform that didn't quite fit right, and he definitely wasn't housekeeping. I shoved past him, my shoulder connecting with his chest, and sprinted down the hallway. I could hear him shouting behind me, heavy footsteps giving chase. I hit the stairwell running, taking the steps 2 at a time, the suitcase bumping against my legs. I burst out into the lobby, startling the receptionist. "Call the police," I yelled as I ran past, but whether from shock or complicity, she just sat there, staring. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap to the face. I ran for my car, fumbling with the keys. As I threw the suitcase in the back seat, I saw the black sedan across the street roar to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness as it pulled out. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I could see the sedan following, gaining on me. I hit the highway doing 20 over the speed limit, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. For the next hour, it was like something out of a movie. Me, pushing my modest sedan to its limits, weaving through what little traffic there was. Them, always there in my rear view, never more than a few car lengths behind. It wasn't until I hit the outskirts of the next town that I finally lost them, pulling off onto a dark side street and killing my lights. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding, waiting to see if they'd drive past. After 10 minutes of silence, I let out a shaky breath. I'd done it. I'd gotten away. But now what? I had a suitcase full of incriminating documents, no idea who had left them or who was after them, and I was pretty sure I couldn't go home. Not if they knew who I was. I sat there for a long time, weighing my options. Finally, I made a decision. I drove to the local police station, parked across the street, and called in an anonymous tip. Then I left the suitcase in front of the station doors and drove away. I'd like to say that was the end of it. That I went home, went back to my normal life, and never thought about that night again. But that would be a lie. The story broke a few weeks later. A massive scandal involving several major corporations and high-ranking government officials. Arrests were made, companies collapsed, and the political landscape shifted overnight. And me, I moved, changed my name, started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, because I know that somewhere out there are people who remember the night their carefully laid plans went awry. People who might still be looking for the man who stumbled into room 317 and walked out with their secrets. So if you ever find yourself in a hotel and there's an unexpected package at your door, my advice, leave it be. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The moment I realized we were heading in the wrong direction, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. The doors were locked. The man behind the wheel was no longer the helpful stranger he'd pretended to be, and the vast emptiness of the desert stretched out around us in every direction. It had started innocently enough. My old Chevy had finally given up the ghost. sputtering to a stop on a desolate stretch of highway somewhere in the middle of New Mexico. I'd been driving for hours, the monotonous landscape broken only by the occasional cactus or tumbleweed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, but I couldn't appreciate the beauty. All I could think about was how screwed I was. I'd tried the engine a few times, but it just made a sad whining noise and refused to turn over. My cell phone, predictably, had no signal. I was stuck. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me. Surely, whoever it was would be able to help, or at least give me a ride to the nearest town. The vehicle, an old pickup truck that had seen better days, slowed as it approached. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a friendly smile, rolled down his window. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. I nodded, explaining my situation. He listened patiently, then offered to give me a ride to the next town. "It's about an hour away," he said. "We can call a tow truck from there." I hesitated for a moment. My mom's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of accepting rides from strangers. But what choice did I have? Stay here and hope another car came along before I died of thirst or heat stroke? "That would be great," I said, grabbing my backpack from the car. "Thank you so much." He introduced himself as Frank as I climbed into the passenger seat. The inside of the truck smelled of leather and tobacco, and country music played softly from the radio. We made small talk as we drove. He asked where I was headed, a new job in Los Angeles, where I was from, a small town in Ohio he'd never heard of, if I had family waiting for me, just some college friends I'd be rooming with. In return, he told me he was a local, born and raised in these parts. He knew the desert like the back of his hand, he said. It wasn't until about 20 minutes into the drive that I started to feel uneasy. Something about the way Frank was asking questions, the intensity of his gaze when he looked at me, it just felt off. I tried to shake it off. He was just being friendly, I told myself. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. We were heading east. The sun, which had been setting in front of us when we started driving, was now on our left. Frank, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I think we might be going the wrong way. Wasn't the town supposed to be west of where my car broke down? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost all its earlier warmth. "No," he said flatly. "We're going the right way." My heart started pounding. I reached for the door handle, thinking maybe I could tuck and roll, action movie style. But the door wouldn't open. Child locks. "Where are we going?" I asked, no longer bothering to hide the fear in my voice. Frank's lips curled into a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Somewhere private," he said, "where we won't be disturbed." Panic set in. I looked around wildly, searching for something, anything I could use as a weapon. The truck was clean, almost obsessively so. No loose tools, no conveniently placed tire iron, nothing. "Please," I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone. I swear," he laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I know you won't tell anyone. No one ever does." The implication of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't his first time. How many others had he taken? How many cars were left abandoned on the side of the road, their drivers never to return? We drove on in silence, the miles stretching out endlessly before us. I racked my brain for a plan, but came up empty. I was trapped in a moving vehicle with a man who clearly meant me harm, heading deeper into a desert I didn't know. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Frank turned off the main highway onto a dirt road. The truck bounced and rattled as we made our way into the wilderness, leaving behind any chance of another car passing by. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes, Frank stopped the truck. We were in a small clearing, surrounded by scrub brush and towering rock formations. In the moonlight, it looked almost beautiful, but I knew this place wasn't meant for admiring scenery. "Get out," Frank said, pulling a gun from under his seat. My legs felt like jelly as I climbed out of the truck. Frank followed, keeping the gun trained on me. "Start walking," he ordered, gesturing towards a narrow path leading between two large boulders. I considered making a run for it, but one look at the vast emptiness around us killed that idea. Even if I managed to outrun him, where would I go? I'd die of exposure long before I found help. So I walked, my mind racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this. Maybe I could reason with him, appeal to his humanity. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever you're planning, it's not too late to stop." He didn't respond, just prodded me forward with the gun. We walked for about 10 minutes before coming to a small cave entrance. My heart sank. This was it. This was where he was going to kill me. "Inside," he grunted. I hesitated, looking around desperately for some way out of this nightmare. That's when I saw it. A flash of metal in the moonlight, half buried in the sand. A piece of rebar, probably left over from some long-abandoned construction project. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I dove for the rebar, my fingers closing around the rusty metal, just as Frank realized what I was doing. He lunged for me, but I was quicker. I swung the rebar with all my strength, connecting with his outstretched arm. He howled in pain, the gun flying from his grasp. I didn't wait to see where it landed. I ran like I'd never run before in my life. Over rocks, through bushes that tore at my clothes and skin. I could hear him behind me, cursing and crashing through the underbrush. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. I scrambled up a steep incline, loose rocks skittering under my feet. When I reached the top, I saw lights in the distance. A town, or maybe a highway. It didn't matter. It was civilization, and it meant safety. I started down the other side of the hill, but my foot caught on a root and I tumbled, rolling head over heels down the slope. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and battered, but still alive. For a moment, I just lay there, sucking in great gulps of air. Then I heard it. Footsteps, coming down the hill. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my ankle. I couldn't let him catch me. Not now, not when I was so close to escape. I limped forward as fast as I could, the lights growing larger with each step. Behind me, I could hear Frank's labored breathing. He was getting closer. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I burst out onto a road, a real, paved road. And there, like a miracle, was a car approaching. I waved my arms frantically, stumbling into the middle of the road. The car screeched to a halt, narrowly avoiding hitting me. An older couple peered out at me, their faces a mix of concern and fear. "Please," I gasped. "Help me. He's trying to kill me." They hesitated for only a second before the woman opened the back door. "Get in," she said. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove into the back seat just as Frank emerged from the darkness. "Drive," I yelled. The man floored it, and we took off down the road, leaving Frank standing there, a dark silhouette against the desert night. We went straight to the police station in the next town. I told them everything, my story spilling out in a rush of tears and trembling words. They found my car where I'd left it, and Frank's truck abandoned near the cave. But of Frank himself, there was no sign. He'd vanished into the desert he knew so well. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that night, about what might have happened if I hadn't found that piece of rebar, if that couple hadn't come along when they did. But mostly, I think about how close I came to being just another missing person, another mystery for someone else to solve. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore, and I always make sure my car is in good working order before a long trip, because I know now that sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes they're waiting on the side of the road, ready to offer you a ride. The The moment I realized the man standing in my living room wasn't really a delivery driver, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was too late. The storm raged outside, the power was out, and I was trapped in my own home with a stranger who had anything but package delivery on his mind. It had started as just another dreary Tuesday evening. I'd been working from home, trying to meet a deadline while the wind howled and rain lashed against the windows. The storm had been building all day, and by nightfall it was in full force. The lights had been flickering on and off for hours, and I was just considering calling it quits when there was a knock at the door. I hesitated. Who would be out in weather like this? But then I remembered I'd ordered a package and the tracking had said it would arrive today. Maybe the poor delivery guy had gotten caught in the storm. I opened the door to find a man in a brown uniform, soaked to the bone and holding a soggy cardboard box. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Got a delivery for you. Mind if I step in for a sec? It's crazy out here." I should have said no. Every instinct was screaming at me to keep the door closed, to tell him to just leave the package on the porch. But he looked so miserable, standing there in the rain, that I found myself stepping aside. "Of course," I said. "Come in. Get out of that rain." He hurried inside, bringing with him the smell of wet clothes and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I closed the door, shutting out the howling wind. "You can set the package down there," I said, pointing to a small table by the door. "Would you like a towel to dry off?" He turned to face me, and that's when I saw it. The look in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude or relief at being out of the storm. It was hunger, predatory. My heart skipped a beat. "That's awful kind of you," he said, his voice low and no longer muffled by the wind. "But I don't think a towel is going to cut it." He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed up. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf might give a rabbit it had cornered. "I think you know exactly what I mean." That's when the power went out. One moment, the living room was bathed in warm light, and the next, we were plunged into darkness. I heard him chuckle, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Well, ain't that convenient?" he said. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew my house, even in the dark. He didn't. That was my only advantage. I made it to the kitchen, fumbling in a drawer for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a rolling pin just as I heard his heavy footsteps entering the room. "Come on now," he called, his voice sickeningly playful. "No need to make this difficult. We're going to have a nice long night together, you and me." I swung the rolling pin blindly in the direction of his voice. There was a satisfying thunk and a grunt of pain. I didn't wait to see if I'd done any real damage. I ran again, this time heading for the stairs. I took them two at a time, my free hand skimming the wall to keep my bearings in the darkness. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. "You're gonna pay for that," he growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. I made it to my bedroom and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't hold him for long, but it might buy me enough time to think of a plan. My eyes darted around the room, adjusting to the dim light coming through the window. Phone. I needed my phone. But where was it? In my panic, I couldn't remember where I'd left it. The door shuddered as he threw his weight against it. The lock wouldn't hold for long. I dove for my bedside table, yanking open drawers. Nothing. Where was it? Another slam against the door. I heard wood splintering. Then I remembered. My phone was downstairs, charging in the living room. My stomach dropped. I was trapped, phoneless, in a dark room with a madman trying to break down the door. The window. It was my only chance. I ran to it, throwing it open. The wind and rain immediately whipped into the room, soaking me in seconds. I looked down. It was a long drop to the ground over the porch roof. I might break something if I jumped, but it was better than the alternative. Just as I was about to climb out, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard. And there, parked behind my car, was a van. A van that definitely wasn't a delivery vehicle. How long had he been watching me, waiting for his chance? The bedroom door exploded inward with a crash that made me jump. He stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, his breath coming in heavy pants. "Nowhere left to run," he said, taking a step into the room. I gripped the rolling pin tighter, backing up until I felt the windowsill press against my back. "Stay back," I warned, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what? You'll hit me with your little rolling pin again? Go ahead. I like it when they fight back." He lunged at me. I swung the rolling pin, but this time he was ready. He caught my wrist, twisting until I cried out in pain and dropped my makeshift weapon. "Now then," he said, his face inches from mine. "Let's have some fun." In that moment, with his foul breath on my face and his iron grip on my wrist, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let this be how my story ended. I brought my knee up hard, connecting solidly with his groin. He let out a howl of pain, doubling over. I shoved him with all my might, sending him stumbling backwards. Without pausing to think, I climbed out onto the porch roof. The shingles were slick with rain, and I nearly lost my footing. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, cursing as he made his way to the window. I half ran, half slid down the roof, my heart in my throat. At the edge, I hesitated for just a second before jumping. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting up through my ankles and knees, but I didn't have time to recover. I could see him at the window, preparing to follow. I ran, through my yard, across the street, to my neighbor's house. I pounded on their door, screaming for help. Lights came on inside, and I heard movement. Just as my neighbor opened the door, I heard the screech of tires. I turned to see the van peeling away, disappearing into the stormy night. The police came, took my statement, searched the area, but they didn't find him. The van was gone, and with it, any real evidence. They told me I was lucky, that it could have been much worse. As if I needed reminding. I didn't sleep that night, or for many nights after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice. I jumped at every sound, flinched at every unexpected movement. I moved out of that house, changed my phone number, even considered changing my name. But the fear lingered. It still lingers, if I'm honest, because I know he's still out there. Maybe watching, maybe waiting for another stormy night, another woman alone in her house. And I know that the next time, he might not make the mistake of letting his victim get away. So I'm telling my story, not just as a warning to be careful who you let into your home, but as a reminder that we're stronger than we think, that even in our darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, we can find the courage to fight back. And to him, if he's out there reading this, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready. And next time, it won't be me who ends up running into the night. The moment I saw those footprints in the old barn, I knew I wasn't alone out here, and whatever was sharing these woods with me was definitely not some harmless wildlife. I'd come out to Blackwater Forest for a weekend of solitude and reflection. My life back in the city had become a chaotic mess of deadlines, relationship drama, and existential crises. I figured a few days of roughing it in the wilderness might help me clear my head and reset my priorities. How wrong I was. The first day had gone well enough. I'd hiked several miles into the forest, found a nice clearing to set up my tent, and spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding area. As the sun began to set, I'd gathered wood for a fire and settled in for a quiet evening under the stars. It wasn't until the next morning that things started to feel off. I woke up to find my backpack had been moved from where I'd left it outside my tent. At first, I thought maybe an animal had gotten curious during the night, but nothing was torn or chewed, just rearranged. It was odd, but I brushed it off and went about my day. I decided to explore further into the forest, following a barely visible trail that seemed to wind between the towering pines. The deeper I went, the denser the woods became. The canopy overhead grew so thick that only slivers of sunlight managed to penetrate, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. That's when I stumbled upon the old barn. It was tucked away in a small clearing, its weathered boards gray with age and half hidden beneath a tangle of vines. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, maybe even a century. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, sending a shiver down my spine. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the few beams of light that managed to sneak through cracks in the walls. Old farm equipment lay scattered about, rusted and broken, but it was the floor that caught my attention. Footprints, fresh ones, pressed into the thick layer of dust that covered the wooden planks. They weren't animal tracks, and they definitely weren't mine. These were human footprints, and judging by their clarity, they couldn't be more than a day old. My heart started to race. Who else could be out here? I was miles from any road or trail. The park ranger had told me I was the only camper registered in this area for the weekend. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something else. Food wrappers, empty water bottles, signs of recent human habitation, but this was no ordinary campsite. The wrappers were piled in one corner, as if someone had been staying here for an extended period, and there, scrawled on one of the walls in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, was a message. "They're coming, run." I backed out of the barn, my breath coming in short gasps. This was wrong, all wrong. I needed to get back to my campsite, pack up, and get the hell out of these woods. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There, half hidden in the tall grass near the barn's entrance, was a cell phone. My hands shook as I picked it up. The screen was cracked, but it still had power. I pressed the home button and my blood ran cold. The background image was a selfie of a young woman, smiling at the camera. But it was the date on the lock screen that made my stomach lurch. It was from 3 days ago, which meant whoever this phone belonged to had been here very recently. And judging by the state of the barn and that ominous message, they might be in serious trouble. I shoved the phone in my pocket and started back towards my campsite, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful yesterday, now felt oppressive. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustle in the underbrush sent my heart racing. When I finally reached my clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. My tent was gone, not collapsed or blown over by the wind, but completely gone. The only sign it had ever been there was the flattened grass where it had stood. My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Who would take my tent, and why? Then a chilling thought struck me. What if they were still here? I spun around, scanning the trees surrounding the clearing. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, a flash of movement between two distant pines. A figure, darting out of sight. Panic seized me. I had to get out of here. Now. But which way? In my haste to return to camp, I'd lost track of which direction I'd come from. The dense forest looked the same in every direction. I picked a direction at random and started running. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I didn't slow down. I could hear something crashing through the underbrush behind me, gaining ground. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. When I couldn't run anymore, I ducked behind a large fallen tree, trying to muffle my gasping breaths. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of pursuit. For a long moment, there was nothing but the usual forest sounds, wind in the leaves, birds calling to each other. Then I heard it, a twig snapping nearby. Then another, slow, deliberate footsteps. coming closer. I held my breath, pressing myself against the rough bark of the fallen tree. The footsteps stopped, so close I could have reached out and touched whoever it was. I could hear breathing, heavy and ragged. "I know you're there," a voice said, low and gravelly. "No use hiding. We've been watching you since you entered our forest." Our forest? Who was this person? And who were we? "Come out now," the voice continued, "and maybe we'll let you leave in one piece." My mind raced. I could make a run for it, but I had no idea which direction would lead me out of the forest. And whoever this was, they clearly knew these woods better than I did. Fighting was out of the question. I had no weapons, and judging by the footsteps, this person was bigger than me. With no other options, I slowly stood up, raising my hands to show I was unarmed. "I'm coming out," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, I don't want any trouble. I'm just a hiker who got lost." I stepped out from behind the tree and found myself face to face with a man who looked like he'd been living in the wilderness for years. His clothes were tattered and stained, his beard wild and unkempt. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. They were wide and feverish, filled with a manic intensity. "Lost?" he sneered. "No one gets lost out here. You're one of them, aren't you? Sent to find us, to drag us back." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm just a camper. I found a phone back at the barn, and..." His eyes widened at the mention of the phone. "You found it? Where is it? Give it to me." He lunged forward, grabbing at my pockets. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling hard. The phone clattered to the ground between us. The man snatched it up, cradling it like it was precious. "She said they'd come for us," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Said we couldn't hide forever. But we showed her, didn't we?" "Yes, we did." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. The woman in the phone's background image. What had they done to her? "Listen," I said, slowly getting to my feet. "I don't know what's going on here, but I just want to leave. Can you point me towards the nearest road? I'll go, and I won't tell anyone about you or this place." He looked at me, his wild eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he might attack. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. It was a harsh, humorless sound that echoed through the trees. "Leave?" he said. "Oh, you're not going anywhere. You've seen too much. No, you'll be staying with us. We always need more for the family." Before I could react, something heavy struck me from behind. As I fell, my vision blurring, I saw more figures emerging from the trees. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was in a dark, damp space that smelled of earth and decay. My hands were bound behind my back, and a gag was tied tightly around my mouth. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others here, similarly bound. Some were awake, their eyes wide with fear. Others lay motionless, and I prayed they were just unconscious. I heard movement above, and a sliver of light appeared as a trapdoor opened. The wild-eyed man peered down at us, that manic grin still on his face. "Welcome to the family," he said. "Don't worry, you'll learn to love it here, just like all the others." As the trapdoor slammed shut, plunging us back into darkness, I realized the terrible truth. My weekend of solitude had turned into a nightmare, and these woods held secrets far darker than I could have ever imagined. And the worst part, no one knew I was here. No one would come looking for me. In trying to escape the chaos of my old life, I'd stumbled into a horror beyond imagination. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the muffled sobs of my fellow captives, I made a silent vow. Somehow, some way, I would find a way out of this. And when I did, I would make sure these monsters faced justice for what they'd done. But for now, all I could do was wait and hope that an opportunity for escape would present itself. because in these dark woods, hope was all I had left. The first time the phone rang, I thought it was a wrong number. By the third call, I knew someone was watching me, and by the 10th, I realized my life would never be the same again. It started on a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from work, kicking off my shoes and collapsing onto the couch with a sigh of relief. The day had been long, filled with meetings and deadlines, and all I wanted was to order some takeout and binge watch my favorite show. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I usually don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize, but something made me pick up this time. "Hello," I said, expecting a telemarketer or maybe a wrong number. There was silence on the other end. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice spoke. It was distorted, like someone was using a voice changer. "Hello, Sarah," the voice said. "Red looks good on you today." I froze. I was wearing a red blouse. How did they know that? "Who is this?" I demanded, my heart starting to race. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe someone from work playing a prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I got up and went to the window, peering out at the street below. Everything looked normal. Cars parked along the curb, a couple walking their dog, the usual evening scene in my quiet suburban neighborhood. But now it all seemed sinister somehow. I drew the curtains and double-checked the locks on my doors and windows. Then I called my best friend, Lisa. "Hey, did you or anyone from the office try to prank call me just now?" I asked when she picked up. "What? No, why would we do that?" Lisa sounded confused. I explained what had happened. Lisa listened, then said, "That's creepy, Sarah. Maybe you should call the police." I considered it, but what would I tell them? That I got a weird phone call. They'd probably just tell me to block the number. So I tried to shake it off. I ordered my food, settled in with my show, and tried to forget about the strange call. But an hour later, my phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time, I didn't answer. It rang 4 times, then stopped. A moment later, a text came through. "Why didn't you answer, Sarah? Don't you want to talk to me?" My hand shook as I dropped the phone onto the couch. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I picked up the phone again and blocked the number. Then I turned off all the lights in my apartment and sat in the dark, watching the street through a crack in the curtains. Nothing seemed out of place. No suspicious cars. No one lurking in the shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't sleep much that night. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and on edge. I called in sick to work. I couldn't face going outside, couldn't bear the thought of being in public where anyone could be watching me. Around noon, my phone rang again. Different unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I got a text. "Staying home today, Sarah. Smart girl, but you can't hide forever." I threw the phone across the room, watching it bounce off the wall and clatter to the floor. This was insane. How did they know I was home? Were there cameras in my apartment? Was someone watching from outside? I spent the next hour searching every inch of my place, looking for hidden cameras or microphones. I found nothing, but that didn't make me feel any better. The calls and texts continued throughout the day, each one more personal, more threatening than the last. "That pizza you ordered last night looked good. Maybe we should share one sometime. Your mother would be so disappointed if she knew what you did last summer. I wonder if your boss knows about those files you accessed after hours." How did they know these things? The pizza I could understand if someone was watching my building, but the thing about my mother, the files at work, this was information no stranger should have. By evening, I was a wreck. I hadn't eaten, hadn't showered, hadn't done anything but pace my apartment and jump at every sound. That's when the final call came. This time, when I answered, the voice wasn't distorted. "Hello, Sarah," said a man's voice, smooth and cultured. "I think it's time we met in person, don't you?" "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Sarah, it's not about what I want from you. It's about what you're going to do for me." "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "No, you're not," he replied calmly. "Because if you do, I'll have to share some very interesting information with some very interested parties. Information about what really happened to your father's company, about where that money really went." My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know about that? I'd been so careful, covered my tracks so well. "What do you want?" I asked, defeated. "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Main in 1 hour," he said. "Come alone, or things will get very unpleasant for you and your loved ones." The line went dead. I stood there, my mind racing. I could run, but where would I go? He seemed to know everything about me. I could call the police, but what if he made good on his threat? In the end, I did the only thing I could think of. I wrote down everything that had happened, sealed it in an envelope addressed to Lisa, and left it on my kitchen table. Then I grabbed my keys and headed out. The streets were quiet as I drove to the meeting point. It was late, and a light rain had started to fall, giving everything a ghostly, surreal quality. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As I approached the corner, I saw a man standing under a streetlight. He was tall, well-dressed, with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He looked like he could be someone's kindly uncle or a successful businessman. Not at all what I had imagined. He smiled as I approached, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those were cold, calculating. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand. "So good to finally meet you in person." I didn't take his hand. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled again, that same chilling sound I'd heard on the phone. Straight to business. "I like that. Well, Sarah, what I want is simple. I want you to use your unique skills to help me with a little project." "What kind of project?" He pulled out a USB drive and held it up. "On this drive is a list of names and account numbers. I need you to do what you do best. Move the money, hide the trail, just like you did for your father." I felt sick. He wanted me to launder money for him, to use the same skills that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. "And if I refuse?" I asked, already knowing the answer. His smile turned predatory. "Then I start making phone calls, to the police, to your company, to your mother. How do you think she'd react to learning what her daughter really is?" I closed my eyes, feeling trapped. This was it. This was the moment my past had finally caught up with me. "Okay," I said, opening my eyes and meeting his gaze. "I'll do it. But after this, you leave me alone. No more calls, no more threats. We're done." He nodded, handing me the USB drive. "Of course. You do this job well, and you'll never hear from me again." As I took the drive, a thought occurred to me, a dangerous, desperate thought. "How do I know you won't just keep blackmailing me?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't. But what choice do you have?" I nodded, as if accepting this. Then, in one swift motion, I grabbed his wrist and twisted, using a self-defense move Lisa had taught me years ago. He cried out in surprise and pain, dropping his phone. I snatched it up and ran. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, his footsteps pounding on the wet pavement. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't stop until I reached the police station 3 blocks away. Gasping for breath, I burst through the doors and approached the desk sergeant. "I need to report a crime," I said, placing both USB drives, his and mine, on the counter. "And I need to confess to one." The sergeant looked at me, then at the drives, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "All right, miss," he said slowly. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" So I did. I told him everything. About the calls, the threats, the blackmail, and about what I'd done for my father all those years ago. It wasn't easy. I knew I was throwing away my freedom, my future. But as I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. No more secrets, no more looking over my shoulder. They arrested me, of course, and him too, when they caught up with him trying to flee the city. It turned out he was wanted for similar schemes in 3 other states. As they led me to a cell, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. I looked tired, scared, but also relieved. The nightmare of the past few days, of the past few years, really, was over. I don't know what the future holds for me now. There will be trials, probably prison time, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. The phone won't ring anymore with threats and demands. The shadows won't hold hidden watchers. I'm not free, but in a strange way, I've never felt more liberated. Because now, finally, the only voice I have to answer to is my own. The moment I realized the footsteps behind me weren't my own echo, I knew this midnight run was about to become a nightmare. But by then, it was too late to turn back. I've always been a night owl, preferring the quiet solitude of the city after dark. That's why I started jogging at night. The streets were emptier, the air cooler, and the usual hustle and bustle of the day faded into a peaceful hum of distant traffic and the occasional hoot of an owl. This particular night was no different, or so I thought. I laced up my running shoes, popped in my earbuds, and headed out into the cool autumn air. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the sidewalks and giving everything an ethereal, almost eerie glow. I started my usual route, heading towards the park. The streetlights flickered as I passed under them, creating a strobe-like effect that played tricks on my eyes. But I was used to it, barely noticing as I focused on my breathing and the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. It wasn't until I entered the park that I first noticed something was off. The park was usually deserted at this hour, save for the occasional homeless person on a bench or late-night dog walker. But tonight, it felt different. The air seemed heavier somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to pre-marathon jitters. I had a big race coming up, and my nerves had been on edge for days. I picked up my pace, my breath coming in steady puffs as I rounded the large fountain at the center of the park. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, just slightly out of sync with my own. I glanced over my shoulder, but the path behind me was empty. Just shadows and moonlight. I frowned, slowing my pace slightly. The footsteps slowed too. My heart rate, already elevated from the run, kicked up a notch. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just an echo or my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I rounded the next bend, the footsteps grew louder, more distinct. I stopped abruptly, spinning around to confront whoever was following me. But there was no one there. The path stretched out behind me, empty and silent. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and scared in the vast emptiness of the park. No response. I stood there for a moment, straining my ears for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze and the far-off bark of a dog. Shaking my head, I turned to continue my run. But as soon as I started moving, the footsteps returned. This time, they were faster, more urgent, as if whoever, or whatever was making them, was trying to catch up. Panic seized me. I broke into a sprint, my feet pounding the pavement as I raced towards the park exit. The footsteps behind me quickened to match my pace, growing louder with each passing second. I risked another glance over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. There, just at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could see it was keeping pace with me effortlessly. I ran harder, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I had to get out of the park, back to the relative safety of the well-lit streets. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps stayed right behind me, never falling behind, never quite catching up. As I neared the park exit, a stitch formed in my side, slowing me down. The footsteps grew closer. I could hear heavy breathing now, not my own, coming from just behind me. I burst out of the park gates onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a startled couple walking their dog. I mumbled a breathless apology as I sprinted past them, not daring to slow down or look back. "Hey, are you okay?" the man called after me, but I was already halfway down the block. I ran without direction, taking random turns, trying to lose my pursuer in the maze of city streets. But no matter where I went, those footsteps followed. Sometimes they'd fade slightly, as if falling behind, only to suddenly sound right at my heels again. My mind raced as fast as my feet. Who was following me? What did they want? I hadn't seen anyone suspicious when I left my apartment. Had they been waiting for me in the park? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I turned down a narrow alley, hoping to cut through to the next street over. It was a mistake. The alley was darker than I'd realized, the tall buildings on either side blocking out what little moonlight there was. Halfway through, I tripped over something, a discarded box or a piece of trash, I couldn't tell, and went sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the rough asphalt scraping my palms and knees. For a moment, I lay there, stunned and winded. Then I heard it, the footsteps, slow and deliberate now, entering the alley. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my hands and knees. But as I turned to run, I realized with horror that I was facing a dead end. The alley was blocked by a high chain-link fence. The footsteps drew closer. I spun around, pressing my back against the fence. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm warning you. I've called the police." No response. Just those steady footsteps, growing louder, closer. I looked around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a broken piece of pipe lying among some trash. I snatched it up, holding it out in front of me like a sword. "Stay back," I yelled. "I'm armed." The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. My grip on the pipe tightened as the figure drew closer. In the dim light, I couldn't make out any features. It was just a silhouette, tall and menacing. It stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I could hear its breathing, slow and even, as if it hadn't been chasing me at all. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound tough. The figure tilted its head, almost curiously. Then, to my shock, it spoke. "I want you to wake up, Sarah." I blinked, confused. "What?" "Wake up," it repeated, its voice oddly familiar now. "You're having a nightmare." Suddenly, the alley around me began to blur and fade. The figure in front of me shifted, becoming smaller, less threatening. I felt a hand on my shoulder, shaking me gently. "Sarah, honey, wake up. You're having a bad dream." I opened my eyes with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. My husband, Mark, was sitting beside me, his face creased with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, rubbing my back soothingly. "You were thrashing around and mumbling in your sleep." I looked around, disoriented. I was in our bedroom, early morning light filtering through the curtains. No dark alleys, no mysterious pursuers, just the familiar comfort of home. I had a nightmare," I said, my voice hoarse. I was running, and something was chasing me. Mark pulled me into a hug. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe now. It was just a dream." As my racing heart began to slow, I nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "Yeah, just a dream." But as Mark got up to make us some coffee, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of unease. The dream had felt so real, so vivid. I could still hear those footsteps echoing in my mind. I got out of bed and went to the window, pushing aside the curtain to look out at the quiet street below. Everything was normal. People walking their dogs, a few early morning joggers, a delivery truck making its rounds. Then, just for a second, I thought I saw something. A figure, standing perfectly still on the sidewalk across the street, looking up at my window. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself, letting the curtain fall back into place, just leftover nerves from the nightmare. But as I turned away from the window, I couldn't quite convince myself that was true, because for that brief moment, the figure had looked familiar. It had looked like the silhouette from my dream. I shook my head, trying to clear away the last cobwebs of sleep and fear. It was just a dream, I repeated to myself. Just a dream. But deep down, a small part of me wondered. And as I made my way to the kitchen to join Mark for coffee, I found myself listening for footsteps that weren't my own,